Alright, let's talk about Mystra. For the uninitiated, Mystra was and is the goddess of magic in the Forgotten Realms campaign setting of Dungeons & Dragons, created by Ed Greenwood. The first Mystra was a mortal who inherited godhood after the original goddess of magic, Mistral, was accidentally destroyed by a Netherese wizard called Karsus in the ancient past. The first Mystra would herself pass away during the events known as the Time of Troubles. She was succeeded by another Mystra for D&D's 2nd and 3rd edition. This Mystra was then assassinated in the events that kicked off the 4th edition, but she came back to life in the second Sundering that brought us 5th edition. It's the second Mystra we meet in Baldur's Gate 3. You know, Gale's ex.
Hello, I'm Gale.
Before we talk about Gale, though, we have to talk about Fire Emblem Three Houses.
Oh my. What could have brought you here?
Released in 2019, Three Houses is a game where you play as Byleth, a mercenary with a murky past who gets a job as a teacher at a military academy after saving a group of their students from bandits. You teach classes, you help your students overcome their problems, and you watch them grow up from awkward teens to capable adults. Oh, and you also get to date them? Personally, I have such a deep, visceral ick reaction to this premise. I've been a teacher. Dating your students is crossing such a serious professional boundary. As a teacher, you're in a position of trust and authority, and in the case of Three Houses, you're more or less raising these teenagers through their final years of adolescence. This is a boarding school. They're away from home. You're helping shape them into the adults that they'll become, and so it feels so deeply manipulative and gross when at the end of that process, you bang them.
Report to the ship as soon as possible. We're banged, okay?
Sure, the comments are going to point out that the romance doesn't begin until after graduation. Still gross. I still can't bring myself to cross that line, even in a game. According to the letter you receive in the epilogue of Baldur's Gate 3, Gale was no more than 8 summers old when he and Elminster first met, and while the timeline is murky with regard to the spell plague, the implication is that Mystra was the one to send him after the young Gale accidentally conjured a fireball, incinerating both his eyebrows and the neighbor's rosebush.
He plucked you from obscurity, offered you his guidance, his faith, and most recently, his pity.
Mystra's direct envoy, her chosen, the lover of her prior incarnation, and the one to rescue her divine essence following the spell plague, came to Gale as an 8-year-old boy to place him on the path of becoming a great archmage, a path on which his whole world would revolve around magic, and therefore around Mystra.
Such was my skill that it earned me the attention of the mother of magic herself, the Lady of Mysteries, the goddess Mystra. She revealed herself to me and she became my teacher. In time, she became my muse, and later even my lover.
The scene where you lock into Gale's romance is one in which he assumes the role of an instructor, as he tutors you on the use of magic. The disturbing implication here is that Gale has come to attach an intrinsic romantic connotation to the tutor-student relationship. He expresses his love by assuming the role of a tutor, because his tutor, when he was an inexperienced boy, used that as her inroad into his pants. And when we meet him in-game, he's still grappling with that. He says that being so young, it felt like love at the time, but now, with distance, he has begun to doubt that it was. Isn't that just, so unbelievably messed up? In early access, many players complained that Gale felt pushy. He was a romantic, he was strongly into you, and he was reluctant to take no for an answer. And many folks felt a bit put off by this, like they were being railroaded into a romance, that they had to practically fend him off. And some of that was a bug. But if you think about it, it's not unreasonable to conclude that he's repeating the pattern Mystra laid down for him. She's a goddess. She may not have given him much of a choice either. And if you're playing as Gale, there's an option to outright state that Mystra forced her gifts upon you. As the narrator says,
She does not give without expecting in return.
And Mystra gave Gale everything. This changeling fantasy of being plucked from a humdrum life to become a great wizard was all her doing. The talents of which he is most proud were hers to bestow, and she, the goddess of magic, imparted secrets of her art to him directly, personally, intimately. He was a boy who, like many young boys, craved validation and yearned to be special, and she was the goddess of magic, lavishing him with personal attention. As the divine patron of his vocation, around which his whole life revolved, she held the fate of his very soul, his very afterlife, in her hands.
Mystra is all magic. As far as I'm concerned, she is all creation.
But let's take a step back from Baldur's Gate. Let's consider a different situation. You're a psychology grad in your early 20s who's just landed an internship in Washington, D.C. This is your big break. You're ticketed to the big leagues. You're one shot that will define the trajectory of your entire life. It all comes down to this. You gotta make it work. And who just happens to swing by the office but the President of the United States? The highest seat in the land, the leader of the free world, the biggest of big cheeses. This is a man with decades of experience who can propel you to the highest heights or destroy your entire career, your whole life with less than a whim, maybe without even noticing you. But he does notice you. And he wants you to bank his bank. History condemns former President Bill Clinton for taking advantage of Monica Lewinsky. She is rightly seen as his victim, because in that kind of situation where one party holds overwhelming power over the other, when one party is significantly older and more experienced than the other, when the livelihood of one party is dependent upon the other, when saying no could utterly destroy your life, when even the possibility of the ordinary romantic feeling has been eclipsed by the halo of awe that Mr. President is talking to me, consent isn't really possible. Even as late as 2014, Monica Lewinsky has insisted that their relationship was consensual. But in 2018, in an article for Vanity Fair in the wake of the Me Too movement, she had this to say. I now see how problematic it was that the two of us even got to a place where there was a question of consent. Instead, the road that led there was littered with inappropriate abuse of authority, station, and privilege. Now, at 44, I'm just beginning to consider the implication of the power differentials that were so vast between a president and a White House intern. I'm beginning to entertain the notion that in such a circumstance, the idea of consent might well be rendered moot. The dictionary definition of consent? To give permission for something to happen. And yet, what did the something mean in this instance, given the power dynamics, his position, and my age? Was the something just about crossing a line of sexual and later emotional intimacy? An intimacy I wanted with a 22-year-old's limited understanding of the consequences. He was my boss. He was the most powerful man on the planet. He was 27 years my senior with enough life experience to know better. He was, at the time, at the pinnacle of his career, while I was in my first job right out of college. History rightly condemns Clinton for this grotesque abuse of power, though arguably not nearly enough. But just imagine if he'd also had jurisdiction over Lewinsky's soul. If he'd been watching Lewinsky her whole life, sending Leon Panetta to start her upon a political trajectory that would bring him to her when she was 8 years old. Imagine if Clinton was a god. It's been said, and I agree, that if Gale were a woman, the disturbing connotations would have been obvious. A lot of people are annoyed by Gale. He seems clingy, desperate, he sort of mopes about being dumped and hates himself for screwing up. And even as he pursues the player character romantically, his ex is always in frame with you, like you're having to measure up to a literal god. And this was even worse in the early access versions of the game. But consider that Gale isn't necessarily like this just because he sucks. He's like this because he's a victim of abuse. It's completely a valid reading of the story that Mystra, who I need remind you is hundreds of years old, has done the dog brushing thing, maybe even from childhood. Mystra is a monster. Some have speculated that Mistra's intention from the get-go was to mold Gale into someone capable of being one of her chosen. And while this doesn't make it any less gross, it makes narrative sense given Mistra's history. Since long before the time of troubles, Mystra has been ceaselessly combing the world for new candidates to become her chosen, because she's so overwhelmingly powerful, even by God standards, that she seems to need to spread out the power across mortal vessels. This may even be part of the reason why she was able to cheat death during the spell plague by squirreling away portions of her power for a rainy day. Her previous incarnation even embarked upon a special breeding program to create lineages capable of handling that divine essence without falling apart, but we'll get to that in a little bit. It's even worse than you imagine. Because Mystra has always acted like this, using people as tools and pawns and vessels in her own selfish purposes. She'd always liked to put on airs about the necessity of her actions and the irreproachability of her wisdom. Elminster likes to talk about his Mystra, particularly. The first one. Like she's the font of all goodness and light in the world. The second Mystra has neutral good on her character sheet. The first had lawful neutral. But really, both the first and the second Mistras have been kind of callous schemers, leaving a trail of suffering and misery in their wake. This video is about Mystra the First.
But for me, it was Tuesday.
In Ed Greenwood's Elminster novels, Mystra puts our titular hero through a lot of shocking, traumatic nonsense, but the framing is that she's doing it in the wise old Mr. Miyagi way, you know? She knows what's best for him, she's teaching him a lesson, she's cultivating in him something that most wizards lack. Empathy. But take a step back, and it's plain to see that Elminster's relationship with the first Mystra is not a healthy one. And Gale's relationship with her second incarnation is very much a mirror to theirs. So who is the so-called Sage of Shadowdale, anyway? Elminster, or El, was born the son of a prince named Elthrin Almar, the lord of a small village called Helden within the kingdom of Athlantar. Elthrin had grown weary of the backbiting at the royal court, married a commoner, and moved away from the capital to settle down and live a peaceful life, which ironically made him a very popular candidate in the line of succession, even though he was far from the eldest of his siblings. But Athlantar had a secret. It was controlled from behind the scenes by a conspiracy of powerful wizards called the Mage Lords. And when King Uthgrail died, the wizards' conspiracy placed his eldest son on the throne and went about mopping up any potential competition. A wizard named Undarl saw an opportunity to worm his way into the Mage Lord's good graces by finishing off the popular Prince Elthrin on their behalf. So he rode into Helden on Dragonback and burned it all to the ground. Elminster was the sole survivor. He grew up in the wilderness as something of a rough-and-tumble barbarian. He hung out with a gang of former knights who had rejected the new king and turned to vigilante banditry. Prince Elminster is a warrior. He kills a man to warm up, helps cut up his horse and eat it, and then goes out into battle and slaughters 8 more. As if that's not enough, he's now about to sweep down alone on a score or more of ready-armed armsmen. What else could he be but a warrior? At 16, he decided to walk away from that hardscrabble life in the wilderness in order to become a thief in the seedy criminal underbelly of Athlantar's capital city of Hastarl. Now going by Eladar the Dark, Elminster started his own gang called the Velvet Hands and got embroiled in a gang war with a rival thieves guild. He also broke into a dinner party, at which a mage lord had the bright idea to use a powerful Netherese artifact to summon and bind Mystra's current Magister. Now, it's worth exploring just what Mystra's Magister is to get a better idea of what kind of a goddess she was. Magister is a special title granted by Mystra. It's sort of her personal champion, an ecclesiastical office but separate from the church hierarchy. It's almost always a wizard rather than a cleric, and it comes with some special powers. And the application process for Magister is, you've gotta murder the previous one. If a Magister dies accidentally, or no living candidates remain, a new Magister is appointed by either Mystra or the god Azuth, who was once upon a time Mystra's very first Magister, before he stole the divinity of the demigod Savarus, trapped his essence in a staff, and ascended. So most Magisters are either bloodthirsty serial killers, or their would-be victims who fended off the former and killed their attacker in the process. Getting the title typically ruins your life, since a parade of power-hungry wizards will soon be beating down your door thirsting for your blood. Your loved ones will probably perish in the crossfire, and Mystra will punish you if you try to hide away. Her church is duty-bound to dox you to whoever asks, and you can't leave the office voluntarily without dying. Your official job as Magister is to invent new spells and spread magical innovation across the world. If you die without inventing a new spell, you're a failure in Mystra's eyes, and your fate after death is worse because of it. The history of the office of Mystra's Magister is full of people who suffered horrific fates as a result either of encountering an evil Magister or becoming the Magister unwillingly. Ioliden Stonehallow was a slave girl who was suddenly and unexpectedly given the title by Azuth in public, essentially doxing her to her owners. She only survived the subsequent rush of attempts on her life because she was saved by a wizard, who was saving her for himself and slew her to usurp the title once they were away. Adriana Vudsar was a peaceful druid who found a cruel magister brutally torturing someone on her land and killed him accidentally while trying to make him stop. Swarms of would-be claimants burned down her beloved forest until Mystra granted her a wish to be allowed to retire by killing her and turning her into a magic garter that gives the wearer fire resistance. She's still conscious. These decent people are the exception. The majority of magisters are exceptionally cruel, hardened killers. Not one, but several of them were famed for their brutality of the tortures they inflicted upon their slaves, because who else but a serial killer consumed by unslakable murder lust would even want a title you can only intentionally get by killing, and then paint a target on your back for the rest of your blood-soaked days? And this is an office that represents Mystra in the world? One Magister even ended up renouncing the use of magic entirely after his hubristic experiments ended in tragedy, which is in Mystra's eyes the worst sin. So she fired him and transformed him into a repulsive immortal monster who can no longer use or be affected by magic. He now roams the world, wallowing in misery, scrawling pleading messages upon walls, asking people to pray on his behalf for Mystra's mercy. So, back to the Elminster story. The Mage Lord uses a Netherese artifact to summon Mystra's current Magister with a mind to slay him and take his place. And unfortunately for the Mage Lord, the Magister effortlessly escapes his bonds and obliterates his captor and the assembled dinner party without breaking a sweat. He then finds Elminster hiding in a corner and heartily recommends the boy learn magic so he can fight back against these evil wizards. And while he is undeniably impressed, Elminster remains of the mind that magic is inherently evil, but it plants the seed of an idea in his mind. One night after that encounter with the Magister, Elminster breaks into the Temple of Mystra with a plan to desecrate it. He has a bunch of fanciful ideas whirling about in his head. He thinks that maybe Mystra might curse the city for failing to protect her temple, so that no more magic may be worked within its borders. He thinks that there might be a magic item in there that he can use to kill wizards, the mage lords specifically. He thinks that maybe he might even get Mistra's attention, so he can ask her why she allowed the mages to kill his parents and ruin his life. So he breaks into the temple, and he's immediately confronted by a mage lord, who decides to sacrifice the young thief to Mystra, and has him dragged to the altar. Because apparently, common knowledge that Mystra will give you fabulous rewards if you slay children in her name. And when his guards are about to run the boy through, Mystra intervenes. This is Elminster's first conversation with Mystra, who gives them space to chat by stopping time, freezing his assailants in place. Mystra asks the boy whether he thinks magic is evil, and he responds that yes, it is. So Mystra asks him whether a sword is evil, because yes, she's playing that card. Wands of Fireball don't kill people. People kill people. Mystra basically tempts Elminster with the idea that if he had magic of his own, he could use that magic to take revenge he craves against the evil wizards that he hates. Elminster replies that if he had such power, he'd use it to put an end to magic and then renounce it forever. Mystra muses for a bit about what Elminster would do with the power he was specifically forbidden to renounce, and then asks him to kneel. When he doesn't, Mystra reveals who she actually is and manifests in all her divine glory. I am Mystra. I am the Lady of Might and the Mistress of Magic. I am power incarnate. Wherever magic is worked, there am I, from the cold poles of Toril to its hottest jungles. Whatever the hand or claw or will that works the sorcery, behold me and fear me. Yet behold me and love me, as all who deal with me in honesty do. This world is my domain. I am magic, mightiest among all those men worship. I am the one true spell at the heart of all spells. There is no other. This manifestation actually hurts Elminster. He describes it being painful, like his veins were on fire, which doesn't sound pleasant. Mystra then asks this teenage boy she's racking with agony whether he'll defy her, and Elminster says that he's afraid, and that maybe he could learn to love her. And so the pain stops. And when Mystra asks him once more to kneel, he does. Mystra then gives him a choice, to leave her presence unharmed, or to trust in her and take her hand. And so he takes her hand and experiences even worse agonizing pain and passes out. He awakens naked, because Mystra has burned all of his clothes, but he finds that he's been granted the ability to see the magic in the air around him. He sees that Mystra has left a message in flaming letters to learn magic and worship her, and then he passes out again at the sound of her laughter as soon as he touches the altar. So, what was all that about? Why the change of heart, El? To a certain extent, the author of the novel in which this is happening might have a bit of a thing for being dominated by powerful women. But Elminster is also around 17 years old here. A few pages back, he was sniffing the stolen jewelry of a merchant's wife and, quote, wondered fleetingly what women were like. In the very next scene, he recalls his singular reference point for what women are like is the time that his buddies took him to a brothel once between then and now. Though he may have been a quick-witted street kid and a killer and a wilderness survivor, young El is unworldly. He's inexperienced, and here's one of the most powerful deities in the universe. A beautiful goddess, offering him an opportunity to right the wrongs he craves so dearly. You could absolutely read this scene as Mystra manifesting like a classic devil tempting a wayward lamb. I know you're in a pickle right now, but I can make all your wishes come true. All you need to do is give yourself to me, bend the knees, spill your blood, sign on the dotted line. And Elminster is desperate. He's so desperate, he came here to spite a god in hopes of invoking a curse that might hurt his enemies more than it hurts him. He feels weak, he feels angry, and yet so powerless, and he literally has a blade to his throat. But don't worry, my child, I can make all that go away. Even the choice to trust her or walk away feels loaded when he's surrounded by armed goons intent on taking his head, held back only by the goddess's power. If Mystra doesn't save him, this is where he'll die. And Mystra does want something in return, even during his conversation. She's constantly demanding to be worshipped, to be loved, to be feared, for Elminster to kneel. She feels that such is her right as a goddess. But maybe she's also a little bit insecure. Ever since she ascended to godhood as her entire civilization crashed down around her, she's been worshipped by petty, slimy, power-hungry little nerds who all feel they've got the hottest sauce in the universe. They're the biggest big shots, that they're entitled to powerful magic, to her very essence. Mystra has grown tired and bitter. Only her pride and the kindness of those who do not worship or aid her for magical gain keeps her going. Mystra detests her own fan base because she knows they don't really love her. They lust after the power she represents and don't even bother to pretend otherwise. What this mage lord is doing, sacrificing a kid on her altar for yet another magical boon to show off to the other magi bros, is possibly ticking her off. If you're gonna spill the blood of babes for her, you should be doing it out of pious fealty, not in an expectation of what you're getting out of it. Mystra raising up Elminster of Shadowdale to be this big ol' hero of goodness and light, despite the fact that she is not in any way a good person, was maybe just a screw you to these horrid little nerds specifically. Not a preference of good over evil necessarily, as much as making them suffer for their presumption. In Elminster, she sort of creates her own perfect boyfriend, someone who really actually genuinely loves her unconditionally and who loves her rather than the power that she has. A good man with a measure of real empathy, whose brain is so cooked that he remains absolutely and utterly dependent upon her, who will remain slavishly faithful no matter how badly she treats him. Because deep down, maybe Mystra is just the same bratty teenager she was on the day she ascended, just with the benefit of hundreds of years of absolute power to corrupt her absolutely. And she will proceed to gaslight, gatekeep, girl boss the absolute crap out of Elminster from this point on. Elminster wakes up in the middle of nowhere, where Mystra has transformed him into a woman. She leaves him another magical note. Elminster becomes Elmara, to see the world through the eyes of a woman, learn how magic is a part of all things, and a living force in itself, and pray to me by kindling flame. You will find a teacher in this forest. Elmara walks until her feet bleed, but the whole thing about making a fire is a trick, since actually trying to light a fire summons a party of elves with weapons drawn. This is the heart of a sacred forest, and this random woman looks to be trying to burn it down. On a whim, they give her a chance to speak before striking her down, and it turns out that Mystra has told them that she'll be sending someone special whom they must instruct in the ways of magic. And so begins Elminster's ascent to magehood. He sets herself up as a priestess of Mystra and goes on a bunch of adventures. Oh, and he also gets himself back into his city by using magic to force a group of guardsmen to experience the pain and trauma of being cut open and disemboweled until they vomit and pass out. Truly something good guys' behavior, something, a cab, I guess. One day, she rescues a sorceress who's gotten into a fight with dozens of guardsmen. The sorceress introduces herself as Mirjala Talithin. Elmara knows a fair bit of magic at this point, but she's aware there are still gaps in her knowledge, so she asks Mirjala to tutor her, and she agrees. He becomes his teacher, his muse, and eventually his lover. Wait, doesn't this sound a little bit familiar? On the cusp of their relationship becoming physical, Elmara finally casts the spell that will undo her transformation into a woman, and admits to Mirjala that he is in fact Elminster. Why took you a woman's shape? Mystra did this to me, to hide me from the mage lords, for my likeness had become known to them, and I think to force me to learn to see the world through a woman's eyes. When I tended ye, ye came to know me as a maid, and I feared that seeking my true form would upset thee and smash the trust between us. I have come to love you, but this changes things. I love ye too. It is one of the reasons I stayed a maid. I did not want to change what we share. Elminster, or Elmara, or whoever you are, come and eat one last time. Nothing can change the good work we've done together. You would think that if Mirjala had something big to share with Elminster, this would be the appropriate moment. But no, she has no secrets, it seems, and they part ways so that Elminster can embark on his lonely, brooding crusade against evil wizards. Elminster decides to go up against the mad mage Ilhundil to warm up before he gets started on the mage lords themselves. But after an epic battle, Ilhundil beats his ass until Mirjala shows up out of nowhere, and together they win. Elminster infers that she must have been following him, and asks why, and she tears up and confesses that she loves him. Aww. So they party up, both tactically and romantically, and embark on Elminster's heroic quest together. It sounds as if you're ready for Athlantar at last. And if I live through purging it of the mage lords, what then? This vow has driven me so long, what should I do with my life? Why, rule Athlantar, of course. Now that the throne comes to my reach, I find myself wanting it less and less. That's good. I've grown weary waiting for you to grow up. So after a bunch more adventures, they challenge the mage lord, slay the puppet Belor, and come face to face with the head mage lord. And wouldn't you know it, it's our old pal Undarl. The very same evil wizard that killed Elminster's family and burned his whole village from Dragonback is now the big bad evil guy of the whole campaign. In a climactic confrontation in the throne room of the royal castle of Athelgard, Elminster cuts his old foe down. In the aftermath, El, as the last living descendant of King Uthgrail, is crowned the rightful king of Athlantar. None contest his coronation, and he immediately abdicates and passes the crown to one of his knights, saying that he thinks Athlantar has had enough of wizards running the show. and so he departs the city and wanders off into the sunset, where he is immediately attacked by Underl, who wasn't dead. It's time for another mage fight! In one corner, we have Underl and his red dragon. In the other, we have Elminster Almar and Mirjala Talithian. But when Mirjala slings her magic at Underl, she finds her spells don't even work on him. Because as it turns out, Underl was never human. He was a Malogrim this whole time, an immortal shape-shifting being from the Plane of Shadows. In fact, unbeknownst to Elminster, he isn't even just a Malogrim either. He's the Malogrim, the first Malogrim, the ancient wizard Malog himself, the very first mortal being to set foot on the Plane of Shadows, who cast aside his humanity to explore the frayed edges of reality and personally spawned the Malogrim race in a tryst with a great tentacled mother from the far realms. I honestly don't have a clue what this supremely ancient and powerful being could possibly have been doing pissing around in some backwater kingdom this whole time, but he effortlessly incinerates Mirjala into a pile of ash before Elminster is somehow able to prevail, capping off his narrative journey from young fighter to powerful wizard. Whether Underl actually dies or not is entirely unclear, but Elminster is the last one standing, holding the charred bones of his lover as they crumble to ash in his fingers. And his conclusion in the moment is that magic has wrought only pain for both him and his loved ones. Actually, maybe he was right all along. Magic is evil. And so he screams to the heavens. Magic brings only death. I'll wield magic no more. And Mirjala pops back in to chide him, cautioning him to never say those words again. Because, surprise, surprise, Mirjala was Mystra all along. Elminster stared down at her, and then at last he realized what his teacher truly was. In real fear, he tried to pull away. A hint of sadness crept into those dark eyes, but then their gaze sharpened, and as much as the firm arms around his neck held him motionless. The goddess Mystra held him captive with her eyes of dark mystery, and said softly, "Long ago you said you could learn to love me." Suddenly her eyes held a challenge. Face white, wordless, Elminster nodded. "Show me, then, what you've learned." The lady beneath him said softly, and cool white fire rose up around them both. Elminster felt clothes and all burn away as they rose into the air amid searing flames, up into the morning sky above the weathered stone plinth. Then her lips met his, and the burning began, as power such as he'd never known before surged into him. Mystra had staged that whole battle with the guardsmen so that Elminster would conveniently stumble upon her mortal guise to save her. Mystra wormed her way into both his confidence and his pants under the pretense of being his tutor, and even as Elminster confessed his secrets to her, she didn't give the game away, even as she pretended to be shocked by the revelations. It was Mystra that first told Elminster that she loved him. It was Mystra that initiated the relationship, because all of this had been her design from the first. She even reveals that she's been watching him since he was 12 years old. I felt the lion sword enchantment stripped away by dragonfire that day when Underl destroyed Helden, and looked to see what befell, and saw a young lad swear vengeance against all cruel wizards and the magic they wielded. A man of great wits and inner kindness and strength who might grow to be mighty. So I watched over him as he grew, and liked the choices he made, and what he grew to become, until he came to confront me in my temple, as I knew he would in the end. And there he had the courage and wisdom to debate the ethics of wielding magic with me, and I knew that Elminster could become the greatest mage this world has ever known, if I only led him and let him grow. I have done that, and lovely man, you have delighted me and surprised me and pleased me beyond all hopes and expectations. Wait, what did she say earlier? I've grown weary waiting for you to grow up. Waiting for you to grow up. For you to grow up. We can maybe speculate a little about why Mystra is like she is in these novels. Like many women in Ed Greenwood's fiction, Mystra is a reaction against a certain very limited sexist conception of womanhood common to the kinds of trashy fantasy that saturated early Dungeons & Dragons and the fantasy genre as a whole. She isn't the demure, submissive, airheaded damsel. She's not the reward for a quest completed. She's powerful and clever and self-assured. She knows what she wants. She's sexually aggressive and takes a dominant role in her relationships. She is the quote-unquote strong female character of yesteryear. In some respects, the forefront of good writing has moved a bit beyond that. The strong female character has become a bit of a cliché. It's a shallow form of subversion when employed thoughtlessly or lent on to give an otherwise paint-by-numbers narrative a thin, progressive veneer. It's been accused of being a bit of a degendering trope as well, as if the role was written for a male character and given to an actress afterwards. And it's too often a fantasy still aimed squarely at a male audience. Many a tough muscle mommy in fiction exists for men rather than in her own right. But even years after Ed Greenwood published this novel, Gary Gygax was out there saying women were inherently unable to find gaming compelling as an activity. He reportedly once received a phone call from prolific game designer Lee Gold and was so utterly bewildered that he repeated the words, "You're a woman," over and over again in a daze until she hung up on him. Mystra in these stories is quote-unquote strong female character in the sense that she retains her undeniable femininity while also assuming many of the qualities one would associate with a patriarchal god. And this unfortunately leads her to becoming a sort of feminine version of Christian Grey. She literally inflicts pain on Elminster until he kneels before her. It's also hard to imagine that the idea of being dominated by a strong, beautiful woman wasn't just maybe a bit of a turn-on for the author. See almost everything ever written about the Drow. But I'm absolutely not here to cancel Ed Greenwood, who has been a stand-up ally his whole life, and I think we could all learn a lot in terms of being less ashamed of letting your freak flag fly. I'm here to cancel Mystra. This whole video is my call-out post, and I brought receipts. Let's rewind a bit, though, and zoom in on the moment Elminster encounters Mystra for what he thinks is the first time in her temple. As I mentioned earlier, they have this little exchange where Elminster confesses that he considers magic to be inherently evil, and Mystra asks him if he therefore considers a sword to be evil. You know, wands don't kill people, people kill people, but this isn't all she has to say on the matter. I let mages use spells freely so that all beings who use magic may escape tyranny, but from that freedom comes such as the mage lords in this land. If you would overthrow them, why not become a mage yourself? Does this line of reasoning sound familiar to you? For starters, this is an expression of a fundamentally chaotic ideal in the realm of D&D alignment. Magic as the great equalizer, enabling even the lowliest peasant to upend unjust hierarchies and re-roll the dice on governance. Magic as the alkahest of tyranny, keeping society ever in flux so no one can ever rest on their laurels. And that's a little unusual, given that the alignment on the first Mystra's character sheet was always lawful neutral. But we'll come to see there's very little about Mystra that would be considered lawful. We've already seen a glimpse of her deep love of disguises and deception. But let me ask you a different question. Have you ever heard the following? God made some men tall and some men short. Sam Colt made all men equal. PBS ascribes a similar phrase to Samuel Colt himself, the founder of Colt's Patent Firearms Manufacturing Company, and one of the people who made the mass manufacture of the revolver possible. This was a marketing slogan that became the adage that came to define gun culture in the United States. In fact, Mystra here is more or less just regurgitating the American myth of the gun as a symbol of freedom. What's that all about? It is sometimes said that tools in isolation are value neutral. Some people will say that science is neutral, technology is neutral. It's how we use technology, the hand that wields the tool. That determines its effect upon the world, for good or ill, right? But this just isn't true. Not even a little bit. As communications professor John M. Culkin said on the subject of the work of the philosopher Marshall McLuhan, "We shape our tools, and thereafter our tools shape us." In contrast, the American myth of the gun isn't the idea that guns don't kill people, people do, or that firearms are a value-neutral tool whose output and ends are solely the province of the wielder alone. Rather, the myth of the gun is that the gun inherently promotes freedom and justice by virtue of its nature as a technology. The guns are the great equalizer, permitting a smaller insurgency to challenge and topple tyranny. That an armed society is a polite society, in the words of Robert Heinlein. Place a gun in the hands of the poorest and most untrained peasant, and they may yet slay the mightiest king. So would-be kings, beware and behave. Now, setting aside the dubious idea that your six-gun can still protect you from tyranny when your government can incinerate you with a drone strike from 50,000 feet in the air, piloted by someone in a concrete bunker hundreds of miles away, and ignoring the fact that the most likely person to be killed by a firearm is its owner, this analogy doesn't hold here anyway. Because the nature of magic in the Forgotten Realms is a tool that benefits would-be tyrants more than it benefits would-be revolutionaries. Magic as a tool of oppression does not require the input of the society being oppressed. A mundane tyrant needs soldiers and officers to command those soldiers, and farmers to feed those soldiers, and blacksmiths to arm those soldiers, and miners to mine the ore from which the smiths will work the metal, and lumberjacks to chop the trees to build the stables in which to keep the horses that'll pull the carts full of ore from the mines, and so on and so on. These are long chains of tools making tools. And without all those people cranking the wheel, a mundane tyrant is kinda screwed, because they need the control afforded by a state in order to maintain the tools that subordinate the state to their own will. To a certain extent, they will always need the consent of the governed, even if the consent is extended only under extreme duress. But a wizard can conjure up an army of magical golems who, unlike palace guards, need neither food nor a compelling reason to remain loyal. A wizard can dominate the soldiers' minds directly. A wizard can make themselves entirely immune to the pitchforks and crossbow quarrels of an angry peasant mob. A wizard can summon a fire elemental to smelt ore and cast fabricate to turn metal into swords. Wizards in fantasy tend to be loners, because mages don't really need anyone they can't summon or mind whammy into perfect obedience. The stereotypical arch-wizard in fantasy tends to live apart from civilization in ye old classic wizard tower, because a single wizard of sufficient power is a sovereign state unto themselves. They don't need an economic base. They are an economic base. Some of the more personable ones might find it easier to get bread from the bakers in town, but strictly they don't need to. They could conjure it themselves. That total economic sovereignty makes iron-fisted rule easier and revolution harder. And that's before we talk about how hard it is to coordinate a revolution when a tyrannical wizard can scry on everyone at all times. Surveillance catalyzes tyranny faster than transparency catalyzes freedom. Again, it's the nature of technology. And let's not forget, magic is expensive. Learning magic is even more expensive. It takes a long time, it requires sustained attention, and all else being equal, it's going to be harder to learn magic if you're a peasant who needs to work the fields for 12 hours a day than if you're a wealthy patrician with all the time and tutors money can afford. Magical power accrues to the smart, sure. Maybe the brave if we're going by the rules where you level up with experience points you get from killing monsters, but it accrues mostly to the wealthy and privileged. Archmages are rare. So ultimately, magic is less a great equalizer as it is a great unevener, putting a basically helpless majority at the mercy of an unimaginably powerful minority. Furthermore, Mystra herself has not only taken steps to reinforce this dynamic, but it was one of her first acts as a goddess. After Karsus's folly, she acted to make magic more exclusive, not less, even though Karsus's folly was literally the fault of the most educated nerd in the Empire using his power foolishly. It's the commoner who gets thrown out of the establishment on his ass. She restricts magic use to only those with aptitude for it, essentially stripping cantras from the common people. Cantras were basically the Netherese equivalent of cantrips, but where cantrips are learned only by spellcasting classes, cantras were for everyone, truly democratized magic. While the more powerful forms were wielded only by arcanists, even street sweepers and candlemakers could cast simple spells. These zero-level spells, known as cantras, tapped only minute amounts of magical energy. Can't have that. Chefs being able to magically heat their food? Dangerous stuff. Banned. Though, as we'll talk about later, there's some dubiousness about whether the real decision-maker here was Mystra or Ao. There is also, however, the entire reason that Mystra elevates Elminster into the paragon of goodness anyway, which is that a lot of the mages, even most mages, absolutely suck. The type of person that becomes a mage is often a conniving, arrogant brat who thinks friends are for losers and who cares if I'm an antisocial shut-in stewing in a tower, because when I perfect my guts to snake spell, I'll show them all, to the extent that it's pissing even the goddess of magic off. And this is the kind of person being bestowed excess power over their fellow man by magic as a cosmic institution. Heck, Karsus was exactly that guy. All I'm saying is, Mystra's excuses are kind of weak. Maybe you can fool a 17-year-old boy with this sophistry, Mystra, but you can't fool me. I suspect the metatextual reason why Mystra is making this argument is that Dungeons & Dragons is, at its heart, a Western. I'm far from the first person to make that observation. And in this repainted Western, magic is your six gun. And though Vancian casting has been slowly eroded in recent editions, you even load your wizard up with pre-prepared spell slots just like you'd load a revolver up with bullets. Even if you aren't the party mage, their magic is what gives you the ability to go head-to-head with monsters and escape the consequences of your actions. The power of magic is the power of the gun in the Western genre, the power of life and death, enabling the Lone Ranger murder hobo to dictate the law to whatever frontier settlement they've rolled into this week. This town ain't big enough for the both of us. It's time for a showdown at high noon. Now, draw! Roll initiative. None of what we've mentioned so far, however, even scratches the surface of the first Mystra's utter bastardry. Let's start with the fact that Mystra has been trying to invest her power in mortals for a long time. For the record, let it stand that some learned folk in the realm cling to the theory that Mystra's power must be rooted, or sourced as they put it, in mortals. Others believe that she was ordained to lessen her own power by a greater authority. A third theory holds that Mystra's move to vest some of her divine power in mortals was a matter of clever tactics on her part. Supposedly, she foresaw the time of troubles, and with it her own passing. She chose to decrease her personal power to make things as easy as possible for her, presumably mortal, successor, and to avoid disaster should another entity win control over her in the chaotic period of wildly fluctuating divine power struggles that was the time of troubles. I guess it's probably a little of column A, a little of column B. The module FRE1 Shadowdale confirms that Ao the Overgod has been siphoning her power without her knowledge into Azuth, into her Chosen, and into various others to dilute her potential, because as Cyric implies in Crucible, the Trial of Cyric the Mad, Mystra in the fullness of her power of the goddess of all magic is probably capable of challenging and displacing Ao as a new Overgod of realm space, which is an outcome Ao is striving to avoid. But, unfortunately for mortal kind, Mystra's divine power is almost inimical to life. Many initial attempts killed or seriously harmed the person she invested it in. The Elven Queen Alavan of Ardheap was one such case. She died shortly after being made one of Mystra's Chosen, as the Silver Fire not only burned her alive from the inside out, but trapped her soul in a state of perpetual torment between life and death. Her extremely powerful ghost has been interred inside a little pocket dimension prison by her loyal attendants, where they must placate her forever by recreating and reenacting the royal code of her youth, to keep her from losing what's left of herself and becoming a monster. Great. Thanks, Mystra. It's also heavily implied that the evil archmage Samister, founder of the Cult of the Dragon, became so unstable in large part because he was also a chosen of Mystra, and her divine power corrupted his mind and soul. He wasn't even evil when he started his magical career. Just an orphan boy who was a magical prodigy at a young age. Wait a second.
Hello.
In light of all this, Mystra forms a plan. She sets about breeding individuals to service her chosen, rather than trying to induce mature and powerful mortals into her service. In this way, she hoped to avoid the problems she encountered with those she selected at maturity, who had long held dreams, feuds, and grudges of their own that tended to draw them away from what she wanted them to do and be. Here we see a theme emerging. Mystra gravitates towards approaching younger people because she gets frustrated with adults. Adults have dreams. They have lived lives that don't revolve around her. Adults have the maturity to tell her no. Children are impressionable, and that's a quality she desires in the people with which she surrounds herself. Yikes. So, Mystra selected her breeding pair and went about trying to get them to shack up. The father was to be a human ranger called Dornal Silverhand, the mother a reclusive half-elf sorceress called Eloe Shundar, who had become independently wealthy from adventuring. Dornal's mother was dying, and yet she had a strange dream of meeting a mysterious sorceress in the moonlight, which, in truth, were sent by Mystra. Dornal first met Eloe in an ancient ruin where he mistook her for an enemy and attacked. She escaped, but Dornal had become smitten with the mysterious witch, and for the next 2 years, doggedly pursued her across the north out of fascination. You have to wonder what was going on in Dornal's mind here. He thought she was an evil witch. What was the game plan? Did he realize she was maybe not what he thought she was? Or did he think he could somehow fix her with his magic rod? In any case, Eloe didn't return his feelings, so Mystra just supernaturally took control of her body and made her do it. Eloe had been reluctant, but under the influence of Mystra, the woman became a seductress, and Dornal found his advances being suddenly returned with great fervor. When Eloe caught on to this body snatching, Mystra revealed herself and enthusiastically agreed to help her goddess. Again, we've got to wonder if consent is truly possible in this situation. Mystra is her goddess, the goddess of her profession, of magic itself, taking an interest in little old insignificant Eloe. Turning away from the worship of Mystra, on the other hand, would see her branded false, condemning her to an afterlife of eternal suffering. Also, the metafictional source for this account is given by Mystra to Elminster. This is the version of the story that Mystra wants told. When Eloe finally moves in with Dornal and meets his mother, she instantly recognizes her as the sorceress in the moonlight from her dreams. It must be fate. And so they marry, with Mystra firmly in the driver's seat. Over the next 6 years, they have as many children, all daughters, which would be taxing for anyone, but being possessed by Mystra begins to corrode Eloe's body. She ages rapidly and sickens terribly, By the time of her 7th pregnancy, she looks like a withered, dying old crone. And Dornell was distraught. He'd always wanted a son, so he was already feeling a bit frustrated, but more importantly, it's obvious now that something was trying to kill his wife, and he doesn't know why, because Mystra hasn't told him anything, because she suspects he wouldn't agree to any of it. So he goes to a priest, as you do. Uncible, the priest of Tyche, in question, tries to divine what is afflicting her, and what he sees isn't good. First off, Eloe is already dead. Her physical body died a while ago. She's literally a lich, a rotting corpse animated only by powerful magic. And second, she's possessed. By something. When Uncible tries to catch a glimpse of what is possessing her, he's only able to discern that it is an entity more powerful than anything he or his church has ever seen. If this entity is hostile, it's an apocalyptic threat. For all Uncible and Dornell know, it has taken over her body by force and killed her, and is continuing to possess her corpse. Surely she wouldn't have concealed something like this if it had been consensual, right? Right? At these revelations, Dornell feels ill. He reluctantly hatches a plan. He invites Eloe, or the monster possessing her as far as he knows, on a walk through the woods on a moonlit night. And then, he chops off her head with the element of surprise, hoping that this would be enough to at least spare whatever is left of his wife the miserable fate of being trapped in her own corpse for eternity. Now, Dornell isn't a particularly sympathetic guy. His stalkerish pursuit of Eloe was cringe, his frustration at her for not bearing him a son isn't great, he wasn't a great father, but he's also never been given any indication his wasn't a fairy tale romance, that Eloe didn't love him back, that theirs wasn't a love written in the very stars, ordained by divine providence, which it was. And now he was watching his beloved waste away before his eyes, powerless to help her. If this was a demon possessing her, Eloe was facing a fate worse than death, trapped and suffering and unable to die. And by killing its vessel, Dornell was the next in line at the body surfing beach. He did care, in his own very problematic way. Mystra was forced to reveal herself. Dornell was shattered by what he had done, and aghast at how he, and especially Eloe, had been used. Mystra tried to comfort him, but his bitterness ruled him. She had the choice of blasting his wits to make of him a servile shell, or letting him go his own way. She let him go. It's incredibly revealing that Mystra's first considered option upon being unable to regain control of Dornell was to lobotomize and enslave him. But mercifully she didn't, so he fled into the moonlit darkness and didn't look back. He abandoned both his lands and his 6 daughters, which sucks. He spent the next few decades throwing himself at villainy wherever he could find it, hoping that every battle would be his last. He'd become a ferocious witch hunter, tracking down and slaying any who would use magic to hurt others. At the very end of his life, as he lay dying on a hillside surrounded by orcs, Dornell does have a change of heart. He prays to Mystra and attributes his survival all these years to her protection. He recants his bitterness towards her, and Mystra forgives him in turn. Aw, so heartwarming, right? His reward is to serve her eternally as an invisible watcher, stalking the world as her eyes and ears. Oh, and remember I mentioned that Eloe was pregnant with her 7th daughter? Well, Mystra decides to just shove that fetus into a drow whose own pregnancy is a stillbirth. She asks Ilisrei for permission. She does not ask the drow for consent, because of course she doesn't. And do I even have to mention how grossly uncomfortable the eugenics angle is here?
All shall love me and despair.
So, what's Elminster been up to since we left him flying off into the sky with his secretly a goddess tutor-turned-lover? Well, a safe rule of thumb for Elminster in these books is that at any given moment, he's probably being tortured. Mystra sent him to the elven capital city of Cormanthor to learn magic from the elves, and he spends 10 years as an apprentice to one of the worst. The master's favorite punishment for apprentices was to paralyze the bared body of the miscreant with spells and set acid leeches on it to feed. The slow, glistening creatures excreted a burning slime as they slid over the skin, or bored almost lazily in. The masked was always careful to use his spells in time to keep his apprentices alive, but Elminster could attest that there had been few things in Faerun as painful as having a slug-like beast eating its way very slowly into your lungs or stomach or guts. Ouch. But in the end, he escapes his master's attempts to frame him for murder, thwarts his master's family's plot to overthrow the Elven King, and even participates in the raising of the mythal that gives Cormanthor its modern name of Mythranor. All's well that ends well, I guess. Flash forward about 500 years, and Elminster has lived at Mithranor for some time, gone on all sorts of adventures, fought in the Weeping War, witnessed the fall of Mithranor, and founded a semi-secret goody-two-shoes organization called the Harpers. And then a bunch of adventurers find him trapped in a Netherese tomb, having fallen prey to a trap that caught him in some sort of magical stasis. Elminster asks them what year it is, and deduces that he's been out of it for about a century. But the timeline here is super dubious, because just 30 years ago, he was out there founding the Harpers. What gives? Well, the Forgotten Realms wiki speculates that any such snarling of Elminster's timeline can be explained by the fact that Elminster's memories have canonically been tampered with. It's not even certain that Elminster has survived his service to Mystra unscathed. Some of his early memories, recounted as fact here and in his accounts of Mithranor, may in fact belong to another, older wizard, such as Azuth, placed in the mind of Elminster later, to shape him into the wily, wise, hardened being Mystra needed. Yeah, Mystra is just going in there and literally editing his childhood and self-perception of his own history to better suit her purposes. Gaslight, gatekeep, girl god. She truly is custom-building her perfect boyfriend, right down to washing and dyeing his brain just the way she likes it. Freshly released from stasis, Elminster prays to Mystra, and she doesn't answer. So he goes to Mithranor, where he sees a bunch of devils launching an incursion into the material plane, and goes to close their portal. But this gets Mistra's attention, and he gets a terse magical text from her telling him to leave alone. Mystra likes that hell portal. It really ties the room together. Elminster is then joined by the god Azuth, who gives a wild speech about how the two of them are tools who must be tempered. And bear in mind that all throughout this conversation, those fiends from before are attacking, and Azuth is just nonchalantly melting them and ripping their wings off. All who work magic serve Mystra, whether they will it or no. She is of the weave, and every use of it strengthens her, reveres her, and exalts her. You and I both know a little of what is left of her mortal side. We've seen traces of the feelings and memories and thoughts she clings to in desperation from time to time, when the wild exaltation of the power coursing through the weave, that is the weave, threatens to overwhelm her sentience entirely. No entity, mortal or divine, can last in her position forever. There will be other Mistras in time to come. We are her treasures, lad. We are what she holds most dear, the rocks she can cling to in the storms of wild art. She needs us to be strong, far stronger than most mortals, tempered tools for her to use. Being bound to us by love and linked to us to preserve her very humanity, she finds it hard to be harsh to us, to do that tempering that must be done. She began the tempering of you long ago. You are her pet project, if you will, just as the Magisters are mine. She creates her chosen and her Magisters, but she gives the training of them to others, chiefly me, once she grows to love them too much or need them to be distant from her. The Magisters must needs be distant, that creativity in art to be untrammeled. You, she has grown to love too much. It is perhaps at this moment also that Elminster realizes that Mystra has other lovers. Elminster is just her current favorite young boy toy. Mystra loves you as no other, but she loves many, including myself and others neither of us know about, some in ways that would astonish or even disgust you. Be content with knowing that among all those who share her love, you are the bright spirit and youth she cherishes. Though it should be noted that Elminster also has other lovers at this point, including numerous elves during his time in Cormanthor, and at least one lich. Elminster would go on later to impress upon a smitten Samaster prior to his fall into darkness, but after his being made another chosen of Mystra, that since Azuth is Mistra's consort and one true love, she cannot possibly love Samaster back. Which, seems a tad hypocritical, but hey, Samaster was being creepy about it. Azuth also explains that Mystra is always watching him, especially during his indiscretions with alluring ladies, and relays a new set of directives. Elminster must use as little magic as possible for his forthcoming tasks. Azuth also cryptically hints that Mystra is currently busy with an inevitable task, and that neither he nor Elminster will hear much from her while she is so occupied. And if you're wondering, yes, she's currently busy possessing poor LOA for her Dornal banging project. So, Elminster is left alone for a bit until one day he receives another terse magical text message telling him to serve the one called Desumia, with no further context. And so he goes to find out who that is. He has a brief micro-adventure wherein a noblewoman tries to steal his memories with sinister piss-based magic, and so Azuth smites her. But eventually he locates the Desumia in question. And she turns out to be a sorceress with not all that sinister moniker, the Lady of Shadows. And she's agreed to take him on as an apprentice. And remember, he's promised a god that he won't use any more magic than necessary. Desumia treats him well, though, and by that I mean she tortures the ever-loving snot out of him any chance that she gets. Her favorite punishment seemed to be forcing him to fetch things on hands and knees that she'd thoroughly broken, so every movement was wobbling, grating agony. But sometimes, more often in recent days, as the year of Mist Maidens abandoned spring for full summer, she preferred strapping El into a girdle of ever-healing, then stabbing him in succession with a slim sword tipped with poison and a blade fashioned of jungle thorns as long as his forearm, dipped in flesh-eating acid. She seemed to enjoy the sounds of screaming. So far, Elminster has only ever been apprenticed to evil sadists that torture him. Mystra loves that for him. Desumia is basically your classic evil edgelord. She has an evil castle lair with a monster pit. She abuses and kills her minions when their performance is unsatisfactory. She wears laced black leather in her illustrations. She has a ton of unique spells to kill people in all kinds of gory, messed up ways. And she's a Bay Knight who can wield his special dark fire. Desumia and Elminster go on a magic carpet ride to the tower of a mage called Hollivanter, who she calls a merry fellow who enjoys teaching animals to sing. She tells Elminster to go and kill him, and when he hesitates, she does the deed for herself. Elminster reminisces about the time earlier in the year where she'd gotten bored of her current lover, one of her servants, and had him tortured to death, but Elminster had secretly saved him from the torture and spirited him away to a healer. Desumia mocks him for his sentimentality. There you are, alone left to fend for yourself. If there's a Mystra who takes any interest in mortal mages, she watches while the strong help themselves over the bodies of the weak. Never forget that, Elminster. As punishment for failing to slay the jolly mage, Desumia forcibly tongue-kisses him while she agonizingly burns him alive from the inside out with her dark fire. What a nice lady! She tells him that she has another target for him to kill, and that this time he will do it. It's a former apprentice of hers called Nadrathan, who she calls the Rebel Chosen. He left her service when he was made a Chosen of Mystra, but then subsequently turned his back on Mystra too. Nadrathan, meanwhile, has set himself up under an assumed identity as court mage of the nearby kingdom of Galadorna, the Unicorn Kingdom, which is deep in political machinations and teetering on the verge of civil war. Its king, Beringrim, was on his deathbed from wounds sustained during an attack by a green dragon called Arlavanta, which was probably orchestrated by a rebel baron called Thalone. Last among this fellowship of ready death strolled the haughty magelings and quick blades of the Baron some folk at the court deemed the most dangerous threat to the freedoms enjoyed by all Galadornans. Thalone, the scarred would-be mage and accomplished swordsman who styled himself Lord rather than Baron, and had largely ignored the decree and writ of the Unicorn Throne for almost a decade. Some say Arlavanta had been called forth from her lair to attack the king by his spells, because Berimgrim had been riding with many armed knights at his back to demand Thalone's renewed loyalty and long-withheld taxes when the dragon's attack had come. It's all very Game of Thrones in here, so in order to avoid a civil war, King Berimgrim names the rebellious Baron Thalone as his successor, since, let's be honest, if Thalone doesn't get the crown, he's going to attack whoever does, and the civil war would be inevitable. But unfortunately, Thalone is probably going to be a bad king. That's monarchy for you. Thalone argues that since he has most magic, only he has the might to rule his glorious new realm of the Blood Unicorn, which, not gonna lie, is kind of a metal name choice. Only mages can guarantee the peace and prosperity we all seek. To those who mistrust magic, I ask you this. If you truly want peace, do you hire and consort with battle-hungry warriors? Galadorna scarcely needs such bloody folk as its lords. I command magic enough to make Galadorna not only safe, but great, and to deal with any traitors in this chamber who plan to put other interests before the security and rebuilding of the realm of the Blood Unicorn. And here, as the crown is being lowered onto Thalone's head, Nadrathan makes his move, because Thalone does not in fact have the most magic. Nadrathan does. So he kills all the squabbling barons with his magic and takes the throne for himself. He even makes what's left of Thalone's charred corpse say some words in support of his coronation. And the very next moment, just as Nadrathan is going to sit down on his new throne, Elminster appears and challenges him to a duel. He castigates the Rebel Chosen for his heel turn away from the benevolent light of Mystra, whom he still somehow seems to be under the impression is a good-aligned goddess. Ulmimber, or whatever your name is, do you know what I am? An archmage of accomplished might, named by Holy Mystra herself as one of her chosen, and now turned to evil. I did not turn to evil, fool wizard. I am what I have always been. Mystra has known me for what I am from the first. While he and Elminster have at it, Desumia sneaks up behind Nadrathan and casts a spell that tears all of the bones out of his body. She then crowns herself Queen of the Unicorn Kingdom, since she killed the last one and killed the one before that, and he secretly killed the one before that. Hurrah for political violence! She names Elminster her seneschal for his loyal service. The Unicorn Kingdom subsequently becomes a gentle and peaceful place, and by that I mean it becomes an absolute garbage fire cesspit of slavers, corrupt merchants, thieves, and assassins, under the thumb of an evil Banite tyrant witch. 3 barons had died so far this year, one of them with a dagger in his throat not 2 steps from entering the throne chamber, and 7 lesser lords. Galadorna had become a nest of vipers, striking at each other with their fangs bared whenever the whims took them, and the court mage was not a happy man. He had no friends. Anyone he befriended soon ended up staring sightlessly at a ceiling of a morning. There were whisperings behind every door in the palace, and never any true smiles when those doors opened. El was even getting used to the sight of dark ribbons of blood wandering out from behind closed doors. Great job, Elminster. Really improving the life of the common people. One night, Desumia goes to chat up 2 guys in a bar, Delver and Ingrath. They've appeared in the story before as Elminster's city guard lackeys. Desumia invites them to have an ambiguously steamy time with her at a secondary location, and they follow because they have the self-preservation instincts of an Elder Scrolls NPC.
What's that? Must have been the wind.
Desumia leads them to a hidden shrine to Bane piled high with rotting corpses, where they start to have second thoughts about their life choices. She gets naked and forces them to whip her while they start sobbing in fear, and then she has Ingrath lie on an altar, getting ready to sacrifice him to Bane. Elminster has been following them, however, and he decides it's high time he put a stop to whatever the hell is going on here, but Desumia notices him, magically dominates the 2 guardsmen, and sends them to kill him. He manages to break her mind control at the cost of cooking their brains with the arcane backlash. And then it's time for another mage fight! In one corner, we have Elminster, who has promised a god he won't use any more magic than absolutely necessary. And in the other, we have the BDSM witch. The B stands for Bane. After an epic and mildly kinky battle that involves her inflating Elminster's body, getting gagged by whips, and turning her own blood into acid, Desumia hits her head and falls unconscious. Elminster then has a dilemma, because he doesn't want to kill Desumia, but knows Desumia will kill him when she wakes up. So he prays to Mystra for guidance, begs for forgiveness for having failed her, and suggests that maybe Desumia will make a better servant than he ever could, so maybe he should just die. And so Mystra gets up and takes off her metaphorical mask Scooby-Doo villain style because Desumia was Mystra all along. So you pass the test, Elminster Almar, and remain the first and dearest of my chosen, even if your brains are too addled to recognize when a ritual of Bane is being perverted, bringing pleasure to his altar instead of pain, and shedding the blood of someone willing. I am proud this night. Obviously, she wasn't going to actually sacrifice or torture anyone. Duh, how stupid are you, Elminster? In fact, you're probably going crazy, Elminster. You can't trust your own senses, crazy Elminster. What could possibly have given you the idea she was really going to do a blood sacrifice? So yeah, all that torture and murder, the years of breaking Elminster's bones and peeling his skin off with acid knives, slaying the jolly wizard who liked teaching woodland creatures to sing, turning an entire kingdom into a lawless ruin of a failed state, a long and fearsome villainous career as the Lady of Shadows? Yeah, that was all Mystra. She just loves to cosplay as a sadistic Bane witch every now and then. And that certainly adds some context to the fact that Desumia's main target for Elminster was a chosen of Mystra who had turned his back on her. Someone who had the temerity to tell her no. When Desumia gave that taunting speech about how Mystra watches while the strong help themselves over the bodies of the weak, how do we feel about that now that we know it was Mystra herself who said those words? Mystra scoops up Elminster from the ruins of the Banite Shrine and flies off into the night, absolutely wrecking the palace as she goes. A few days later, a rival kingdom exploits the chaos caused by the sudden absence of the Unicorn Queen and her seneschal. Their army sweeps in to sack and pillage and burn the capital city to the ground, and whatever happens to all the commoners living there, yeah, they probably didn't get a happy ending, guys.
Marion, don't look at it. Shut your eyes, Marion. Don't look at it no matter what happens.
So, it's not just me, right? This is just straight up abuse. If a masked assailant broke into your house, kissed you against your will, stabbed you repeatedly, and then threatened to shoot the neighbor's dog, and then finally pulled off their balaclava to reveal it was your lover all along, and they were just testing you, you'd probably break up with that person and file for a restraining order. But what Mystra does here is even more extreme. It goes on for years. It involves stuff that makes Guantanamo Bay look like a fun summer destination for the whole family. And the collateral damage along the way is on the order of entire city-states being burned to the ground. But at the end of the day, there's not even a question as to whether Elminster will take her back. Because of course he will. Because she owns him. She controls his very memories, and he, in turn, doesn't just worship her like a goddess, he worships her because she is his literal goddess. It's difficult to find an example of a relationship in fiction that is messed up to this extent that isn't cast as villain and victim, but Elminster is the protagonist of these novels. Mystra is his great love. She's his beautiful, tempestuous, and yet supposedly deeply wise benefactor. And he comes out of it all as this legendary hero, with these experiences having made him great. In the end, Mystra knows what's good for him. She makes him suffer because she loves him, and she needs to toughen him up. The gods work in mysterious ways, or whatever. But if we take a step back from those extremely dubious justifications, it's gross beyond words. It's an almost textbook abusive relationship, complete with the overdone yet painfully realistic trope of violence equals love. This hurts me more than it hurts you. And the aggressor asserting a right to decide on their victim's behalf on grounds of a kind of intellectual seniority. We typically recognize that reasoning as abusive and morally wrong in a romantic relationship, but it's important to note that there are still segments of society in which this is a normalized dynamic between adults and children. Spare the rod, spoil the child, and so forth. Mystra's relationship with Elminster almost spans both, since she's both his lover in a romantic sense, and also in a more paternal, platonic sense. Elminster was orphaned, and Mystra easily slips into a role akin to a surrogate parent. She's his tutor, his mentor, his benefactor, the one that watches over him while he sleeps, the one that has taken it upon herself to raise him right and teach him how to be a good, honest man, since he is but a foolish little boy, even if by this point he's hundreds of years old. Given the dominance of Christianity, we in the West are culturally primed to associate divinity with our hierarchical and patriarchal concept of parenthood. God the Father. He knows what's best for us. Obey him as you would obey your father. Obey your father as you would him, and so on. It's all tied up in this idea that piety is a virtue and lack of faith a sin. That gods deserve worship because of the quality of their inherent divinity rather than that of their character. This is a kind of cultural background radiation that D&D soaked up hard. And speaking of this exact thing, at the end of The Temptation of Elminster, our subtlety budget abruptly runs out as Mystra beguiles the titular hero with a montage of visions that are super explicit parallels to the temptation of Christ. First, Elminster sees himself as a great monarch, flush with all the treasures in the world, before whom the mightiest emperors fall to their knees to offer him their crowns and lands, and Elminster refuses, though it's not entirely clear in what sense Mystra is literally offering this to him. Like, if he was to say, yeah, this sounds great, I'm in, there's no way he would actually become God King of the whole world, surely. But anyway. Next, Elminster sees one of his one-night stands from earlier in the novel, and this isn't an illusion either, it's actually her. Mystra magically compels her to give the unseen Elminster a striptease, and of course, she doesn't ask for consent. The sun fell through the windows of Fox Tower and laid dappled fingers across the parchments Emeria was frowning over. Gods, how did anyone make sense of such as this? She sighed and slumped back in her chair, and then, in a sort of dream, found herself rising to glide across the room, towards its darkest corner. Halfway there, her fingers began to pluck at her catches and lacing, to tear open the front of her gown, as if offering herself to empty air. Emeria frowned. Why? She murmured, then abruptly shivered, whirled around, and did up her gown again with shaking fingers. Her busy fingers clenched into fists when she was done, and she peered in all directions around the deserted room, her face growing pale. Bear in mind, Elminster at this point is somewhere between 400 and 600 years old, though he still looks and behaves like a young man. I have no idea how he doesn't see it as an enormous red flag that Mystra is offering him a terrified, vastly younger woman as a reward after forcing her to strip. Her warm, yearning eagerness and hope, her delight. Elminster reached for Emeria, a broad smile growing on his own face, a smile that froze as the thought struck him. Was this spirited young woman to be some sort of reward for him, to mark his retirement from Mystra's service? He snatched back his hand from the approaching woman and told the darkness fiercely, "No, long ago I made my choice, to walk the long road, the darker way, and know the sweep of danger and adventure and doom. I cannot turn back from it now, for even as I need Mystra, Mystra needs me." Mystra then tempts Elminster with knowledge, grand libraries and legendary grimoires, and again he refuses, though she almost gets him a second time when she offers a book on forgotten Netherese magic. She then shows him a vision of the sad fate of her very first chosen, Eltheris, because Mystra has, of course, been breaking people for a long time. No more. I find that first among her chosen has become an empty boast. Find another fool to be your slave down the centuries, lady. Everyone I loved, everyone I knew, is dead and gone. My work is swept away by each new grasping generation of spell hurlers. Faerun fades into a pale shadow of the glory I saw in my youth, and most of all, I'm so damn tired. I wonder why Eltheris would feel that way. He then blows himself up, to the delight of Mystra's second chosen, who gives a speech about how evil and depraved he's going to be in the absence of a compassionate counterbalance. Which, yeah, Elminster, you can't give up on me now, or else the one who comes after you might really suck, and all the horrible stuff they do would be all your fault. I know manipulative goddesses who use subtext, and they're all cowards. She then shows him a vision of himself murdering Azuth to take his place in the heavens by her side, which he also rejects. And then, as if to underline her earlier guilt trip, she shows him one of her more evil chosen in the present day, talking to himself about how he's going to take all the magic for himself and live forever by stealing people's bodies. Elminster has had enough, and goes into sad boy mode. "Oh, Mystra, lady mine, must this go on? Torment me no more, but give me some sign. Am I worthy to serve you henceforth? Or are ye so displeased with me that I should ask ye for death? Lady, tell me." It's wild that Elminster has reached a point where he has to ask Mystra whether she wants him to die. Like, that's a reasonable expectation of a romantic partner. But instead, Mystra finally appears to suddenly kiss him and tell him she'll have a critically important task for him soon, which turns out to be raising 3 of the daughters from her chosen breeding program, because around this time is the moment that LOA gets her head cut off, and now Mystra has 6 of them to hand out. And thus begins Elminster's greatest adventure, fatherhood. As soon as he meets them, they immediately attempt to kill him with their super magic, but he just barely manages to survive to introduce himself as their new dad. The end. Candlemas whirled, startled. The woman had entered his workshop silently, even opening the door without his knowing it. He'd been daydreaming, thinking of Equisita and when he might visit her. Too, he wondered about Sunbright and that young, one-eyed thief. Were they safe on the ground? And how might he locate them if the need arose? Or would he never see the barbarian again, and why did the loss pang his heart? And now this girl jarred him from his daydreaming, then stunned him with familiarity. She resembled a young Lady Polaris, white hair, slim, beautiful in a perfect porcelain way, but this woman, girl really, she had none of Polaris's cold aloofness. Rather, she seemed to cast a warm glow despite her cool looks. "Sir," she said in a voice no less beautiful, "do you work with Karsus?" In the novel Dangerous Games, a wizard named Candlemas, an apprentice of the powerful Netherese archmage Lady Polaris, has time-traveled from the shadowed age of Netheril to immediately prior to the Empire's fall. It's a long story, and yes, Karsus is very much involved. Candlemas even becomes romantically involved with Karsus's cousin, Lady Aquisita, and a short time prior to the climax of the narrative, there's a scene in which he receives a mysterious stranger in his workshop. "Why do you ask? Has Karsus told you anything?" "Oh no," she giggled suddenly like a child. "I could never get close to Karsus. He'd know me in an instant." "But," Candlemas started to say as he backed against the table. It was as if she'd turned cold, but hot inside, like one of Sunbright's polar bears off the ice cap. "How? Who are you?" The frost-topped girl stepped closer and said, "My name is Mystra. I was named after the goddess, but better you forget me." Quickly, she leaned forward and pecked him on the cheek. He stood, dazed, unmoving. Yep, it's Mystra. That Mystra. The Mystra who will become the next goddess of magic, just prior to her ascension. At this time, the current goddess of magic is Mistral, but there's clearly already something strange about this girl. In gaining access to Candlemas's workshop, she displays magical powers that are at once overwhelmingly powerful and entirely effortless. Obviously, being an experienced Netherese archmage in the middle of an absolute hurricane of political and magical intrigue, Candlemas is warded to the hells and back. And not only is he warded, but so is the workshop, and the building. And Aquasita is here and in the next room, and she detects nothing. But Mystra does time her non-consensual kiss precisely so that she witnesses it just as she walks in, hamper in hand, to invite her boyfriend out for a picnic. And Candlemas doesn't remember a thing. She's able to modify his memory instantly, even through all his layers of abjurations, 0 cast time, 0 somatic or material or verbal components, 0 qualms, and 0 consent. What? Candlemas scanned the room. What girl? In this room, not 30 seconds ago. Her plump fingers stabbed downwards, her golden brown eyes flashed. She kissed you, and you kissed her back, and she flounced from the room right past me without a word. The man wondered which was the worst crime for a woman, being cheated or being ignored. But he hadn't a clue what she meant. There hadn't been any girl, and he always wove personal wards to keep enemies at bay. No one could approach him without his knowledge. Certainly not close enough to kiss him. But then, his magic was outdated. Aquasita is near the pinnacle of magical skill, at the apex of a civilization that has itself reached the pinnacle of magical development. The Netherese are exploring the furthest reaches of space with epic magics like Valdic's Sphere Sail that can zoom through wild space and the phlogiston faster than any Spelljammer ship can, even in the modern Spelljammer setting, and which doesn't rely on the helm technology of the arcane that almost every other civilization uses. They have a spell for routine use that chops mountains in half to use as flying cities. They're at the point where they're developing epic magic that ascends a caster directly to godhood, and yet whatever magic Mystra is using here doesn't even register. Pish, you think I wouldn't sense her enchantments? I'm cousin to Karsus, you know. I haven't anywhere near his magical abilities, his genius, but I can detect magic with both eyes shut. She was nothing but a paltry wench with no more magic than my parrot, and skinny besides. This was bad, Candlemas knew. He was in trouble with a woman over something only a woman understood, and plump women hated skinny ones worse than poison. But what girl? The least you could do is apologize. Aquasita's voice contained a sob, and Candlemas found hope in that. At least she cared enough to cry over him. Obviously, this absolutely devastates Aquasita. She's desperately insecure about her appearance, and this is a metaphorical dagger perfectly crafted to hurt her in the most effective way. She's found a man who sees her and loves her, and bam! There he is, kissing another woman in secret in his workshop. All those deep-seated fears about how maybe this happiness isn't real and she's ultimately ugly and unlovable, they're suddenly made manifest. Sita, please, I'm sorry, he said, though sorry for what he didn't know. I'm sorry if you're upset. Likely, she blurted out. Likely not. You're... And then she was gone, whirling down the hall in a flurry of skirts and tears. When he made to follow, the door slammed in his face, almost whacking his nose. What? He asked. What did I do? What did she do? Was there a she at all? And if so, why did she kiss me? Why does Mystra do this? Seemingly it's just sadism for its own sake, which wouldn't be out of character given everything we've heard her do in this video. Aquasita doesn't have much to do with Karsus, and he wouldn't care anyway because he's very much that kind of thoughtless, loveless dude who doesn't value the feelings of anyone except himself. This rather seems to be just a casual, offhand ruining of someone's life. As a treat. The sort of cruel jape Mystra will come to love. But it's stranger still because it's in a kind of tension with the other sources about the magical capabilities of the young Mystra. When Mistral reincarnated herself, this time as Mystra, she used the form of a beautiful peasant girl learning the basics of Cantra magic but with the capacities for archwizardry. Her first priority was to recreate the weave of magic. This time she made magic follow a few more rules, and no spells above 10th level would function. By the time she was completed, she was able to save only 3 of Netheril's floating cities. The rest were utterly destroyed. These 3, Anaria, Asram, and Huandath, were high enough above the ground to survive. The cities safely landed, and the survivors stumbled away from the cities in shock. The young Mystra was just learning the basics of cantras, which, as we heard a few chapters ago, were basically like a lesser form of cantrips. Cantrips won't get you past the security of Netherese Archmage royalty, or instantly wipe and rewrite the memories of a heavily warded wizard. Rather, this was the magic of a god. Mistral's magic. Which raises the question, was this even Mystra at all? Or was this Mistral possessing her, the better to keep a watchful eye on the wizards, and one wizard in particular, who she might already know will bring her down? Dangerous Games recontextualizes Mystra quite a bit. In all the other sources, it's easy to build up a picture of a mortal Mystra as basically a traumatized peasant girl suddenly granted the powers of a goddess during a time of epic crisis as her whole civilization literally crashes down around her. Mystra comes into her semi-omniscience just in time to catch 3 of Netheril's cities, literally plucking them out of freefall, which is quite the baptism of fire. But the Mystra of Dangerous Games isn't unprepared at all. She's clearly been groomed for this for quite some time. When it all goes down and Karsus casts his final spell and magic falls apart, Mystra is sitting there, watching it all happen, with a smile. On a surprisingly peaceful mountainside, miles away from the falling empire of Netheril, sat a star-eyed girl named Mystra. A smile crept across her face, a tingle ran through her body, and a soft voice, a cloud's voice, whispered in her ear, "Soon." Where the heck are this girl's parents? It's also not hard to be uncomfortably reminded of Mystra's magical breeding program from earlier in the video. Mistral clearly chose her successor with an unexpectedly cold intentionality, rather than in sudden panic as she watches Karsus stick a fork into the metaphorical electrical socket. She was literally named after the goddess. Was this a coincidence? There are a couple of alternate interpretations. The first is that Mystra was raised from a young age to be the successor to a goddess who knew long before it happened about her ultimate fate, which is the sort of thing that could absolutely mess up your moral and psychological development.
I am the king!
The second is that Mystra might have been raised to not be a successor, but a vessel. Again, very much in the vein of the Seven Sisters. In Candlemas's workshop, it's ambiguous who's actually in the driver's seat. Mystra or Mistril? Maybe this whole time, Mystra has literally been Mistral in some form, wearing her essence as an avatar in the same way that Desumia was Mystra all along. But as much as this would explain a lot about her confusing alignment, the rest of the D&D canon really just doesn't give this thesis too much support. It might also be somewhere in the middle. The Mystra that arose from the ashes of Netheril could have been some confused amalgam of peasant and goddess, merged rather than ascended. Or perhaps Mystra was a contingency plan just in case Karsus's ambitions got out of hand, which obviously they did. It is strongly implied that foreknowledge about the downfall of the goddess of magic was out there in some form. At the very least, the enigmatic Terraseer, the unfathomably ancient and powerful entity who orchestrated the entire rise and development of the Netherese Empire from behind the scenes, seems to have seen it coming. It was his dire warning to Karsus that prompted Karsus to research the spell that would precipitate the crisis, a self-fulfilling prophecy. There's definitely a lot more to dig into there, but it's a topic that deserves a dedicated video of its own, honestly.
I never broke the law! I am the law!
Before we return to the history of Mystra, we do need to talk about alignment. Because, as I've mentioned before, this first Mystra's alignment was lawful neutral. The first Forgotten Realms box set contains the note. Mystra was made lawful neutral on the premise that magic is inherently neutral and exhibits internal order and laws. Which is certainly a choice from a world-building standpoint. Sure, magic is a tool that can be used to do great good or great evil, and as much as its nature does affect society in certain preferential ways, as we discussed earlier, it makes sense that magic is always going to be inherently neutral. But internal order and laws? I guess. Some fiction casts magic as an inherently chaotic force of pluripotentiality. And later on, the Forgotten Realms itself would go in that direction when it decided in 2nd edition that Mistral was the original, chaotic neutral goddess of magic. Mystra, therefore, sort of represents not just magic, but the yoking of magic. Not the wild bull, but the one who rides on it. Upon ascending to godhood, one of her first acts was to enact Mystra's ban, forbidding any spell above 9th level. Being able to bypass this restriction is one of the special powers of Mystra's Magister, but they can only ever do it once and must then die. Secrets of the Magister's note that a Magister once used this perk to cast a spell that would exterminate an entire city containing an ethnic group he didn't like because they refused to accept his authority. Classic Magister behavior. Except, plot twist, Mystra's ban wasn't Mystra, as Ed Greenwood explained himself on Twitter. We know it in the realms as Mystra's ban because of priestly teachings. Regular folk know nothing of Ao, but everyone knows about the goddess of magic. At the time the ban was enacted, Mistral was in no condition to ban anything, and Mystra didn't exist yet. #Realms lore. So yeah, the biggest lawful thing Mystra ever did wasn't even her. So what exactly does lawful neutral mean, other than the alignment most likely to call the cops on someone for having a broken tail light? Those of this alignment view regulation as all-important, taking a middle road betwixt evil and good. This is because the ultimate harmony of the world and the whole of the universe is considered by lawful neutral creatures to have its sole hope rest upon law and order. Evil or good are immaterial besides the determining purpose of bringing all to predictability and regulation. Order and organization are of paramount importance to characters of this alignment. They believe in a strong, well-ordered government, whether that government is a tyranny or a benevolent democracy. The benefits of organization and regimentation outweigh any moral questions raised by their actions. An inquisitor determined to ferret out traitors at any cost, or a soldier who never questions his orders, are good examples of lawful neutral behavior. Dungeons & Dragons has never been perfectly clear on precisely what it means here. There's an inherent Barnum statement vagueness to a lot of the write-ups on each of the alignments. Law and chaos stand for a lot of things, and they're not always even mutually exclusive. If you're extremely creative, make decisions spontaneously, according to a code, live each day on its own terms, always keep your word, experience frequent mood swings, love freedom, are honorable, believe in strongly retributive justice, obey your local monarch but resent their tyranny, and believe that there should be predictable consequences for one's actions, then congratulations, you're strongly lawful chaotic. The essence of law in an alignment sense is often taken to be a love of hierarchy and hierarchical power structures in particular. All things in their right place. God's in his heaven, all's right with the world. Chaotic evil is also intrinsically hierarchical, representing a Hobbesian state of nature in which the strong dominate the weak, because hierarchy spontaneously generates from any desire to control or hurt others. Ultimately, the roots of that distinction between law and chaos lie deeper than that, and Planescape agrees that there's more to it, but that's beyond the scope of this video essay. Instead, let's just consider the issue of whether Mystra has been especially lawful in her interactions with Elminster. So, from the first, she wears many faces. One moment she's being kind to Elminster, the other she's lying to him and hurting him. She loves disguises and surprises and deception. She modifies his memories, which is another form of deception. She's tempestuous and mercurial. Her first act upon introducing herself is to turn him into a woman without asking. As a character, she's something of a trickster god archetype like Loki. She's making some sort of a point, but always obliquely. She's always hiding her masks behind masks. You're never quite sure what she'll do next. Elminster is praying to her constantly and usually not sure if he'll receive a response because she ghosts him a lot even when he's in a super dark place. She just really can't be predicted. Her historical interactions with Candlemas also seem to suggest that she's always been like this, a mercurial trickster leaving a trail of chaos and wrecked relationships in her wake. She lays down rules, but many of her rules are either some variation of do as thou wilt or don't screw with me. Her magisters are basically encouraged to cheat and gank one another. They are compelled to accept any challenges issued to them, but equally, you can just hit them with a chair while they're asleep, and that's fine too. From a mechanical point of view, if Mystra is lawful neutral, then a lawful evil acolyte of Bane is only one step removed from her own alignment. But, again, even Desumia interfered in her champion's formal duel by ganking the other dude from behind, hardly ever showed up to meetings except to indulge in some random violence, and just generally did her own thing while law and order in her country completely fell apart. Desumia, just like the one behind her cosplay, is interested only in one kind of law, her own whims. What I'm getting at is that Mystra seems like the kind of person who would cheat at cards if she saw any personal profit in it. If caught, she might make a big speech about how you've passed the test for noticing, and in fact it was all necessary to preserve the future of magic in the world, but she's not someone who plays by any rules but her own. And that's born out of what we're going to talk about next in the next chapter, because when she gets evicted from her divine house by her divine boss, who sucks even more than she does, admittedly, she refuses to accept his authority. She swears that she will return home by hook or crook, and she tries various magical means to escape back to the Outer Planes. Eventually, she even attacks the literal god of guards, Helm, as he stands guard on the Eternal Staircase, and doesn't stop until he knocks her proverbial block off. Ao's authority may indeed be cruel and unjust, though canon says he's above good and evil, but Mystra just doesn't care for the divine hierarchy of which he is an integral part. If you firmly demand everyone else obey your ironclad laws, but then you personally lie, cheat, swindle, and betray everyone else every chance you get, is that lawful behavior? A powerful abyssal lord like Malconthet or Grazd might behave like that. They're both rulers, after all, fancy thrones and all. But there are laws for thee, not for me. And so goes Mystra. Her law matters because she has the power to hurt you if you cross her, but she recognizes no higher authority. To a certain extent, a lot of that thing that D&D calls alignment doesn't really make much coherent sense. It's too many loose concepts stapled together. Planescape, again, really tried, but that's a topic for another day. The inescapable conclusion is that labeling the first Mystra as lawful neutral is dubious at best. And yet, she does seem to find her home plane of Mechanus, known locally in the Forgotten Realms as Nirvana, aesthetically pleasing by virtue of its orderliness. Nirvana, the plane of ultimate law, held Mystra's domain. It was a perfectly regimented, infinite area where light and darkness, hot and cold, were ideally balanced. Unlike the chaotic landscape of the realms, Nirvana was structured like the inside of a huge clock, with equal ordered gears meeting in ideal junctions. On each of these gears rested the realm of one of the lawful gods that inhabited the plane. Of course, Mystra saw her realm as the most beautiful in Nirvana, in all the planes, in fact. So order and chaos is one axis of alignment, sometimes called the ethical axis. The other is the moral axis, good and evil. When you're venerated by red wizards and your stable of beloved favorites includes not just good boy Elminster, but also Larlock, the Shadow King of Warlock's Crypt, and Dracolich Dargathoth, the Creeping Doom, and an endless parade of magical serial killers, it's hard to be fully good aligned. Even if we set aside Mystra's personal bastardry, her portfolio services the deepest evils as much as it does the heroic protectors of the innocent. Dargathoth and Larlock both have her explicit favor, and despite being some of the worst undead villains on Faerun, are in a state of enforced truce with her champions and her church. Larlock tries his best not to hurt Mystra's servants, and her servants in turn aren't allowed to hurt Dargathoth, because both of them benefit her and her cause of magic. Mystra finds most evil wizards odious, not because they're evil, but because they're annoying. They're entitled, whiny graspers who always want stuff from her. But Larlock and Dargathoth are both consummate gentlemen who know it would be scandalously improper to presume themselves on first-name terms with the lady. They're amazingly talented wizards in their own right who continue to push the frontier of the magical arts in underprivileged fields such as undead pregnancy and body horror curses. Larlock would even contribute to saving Mystra's life during the spell plague. And Samaster, who fell to darkness in part because of the investiture of Mystra's power corrupting his mind, seemed to almost become more appealing to Mystra because of it, until he started breaking her other toys anyway. One must keep in mind that the Mystra we know today is not the one from the time being discussed. Mystra then was a much more neutral deity. As has often been recorded, her primary interest was in the use and development of magic. She was less particular about how it was used or by whom. Apparently, as long as Samaster continued to advance the theories of magic and push forward into its frontiers for all mortals, Mystra turned a blind eye. One must therefore assume that this attitude prevailed with her chosen as well. Certainly, many acts of several of the other chosen would be frowned upon by a more morally minded Mystra that Toril is blessed with today. We've seen through the rest of this essay just how monstrous Mystra can be, and how little she cares about seeking the consent of those whose lives she ruins for her own plans to her own benefit. And I think there might be, like, a word for someone who doesn't really care about morality or the suffering of other people, but rather only cares about their own self-interest. An alignment associated with pure selfishness, damn the cost to others. What's the word for that? It must have slipped my mind. But Elminster really doesn't see it that way. He often regarded his Mystra with visible fear, but after the first meeting, never doubted the benevolent, transcendent purity of her motives. During the climactic battle in Cormanthor, one of his rivals turned allies is mortally wounded, and reveals that Mystra enlisted her some time ago. His response is that Mystra would never give up on her, nor let her down. She'd never run around and desert her. I thank you for making my passing easier, but I am dying. You cannot stay that. Mystra snatched me from death that night in the woods, the death Elandor planned for me, for a task. I've served her, and 'tis done. I can die. Mystra does not treat folks so. Elminster is certain that Mystra is basically a capital G good goddess who has everyone's best interest at heart, that she would never hurt anyone. And sure, this was before she peeled off his skin with acid knives for an entire year, but even that doesn't really change his mind. To Elminster, it's always he that has failed her. It's him that deserves to suffer and die for not being good enough. If she's hurting him, it must be his fault. His mere survival is proof of her love, and whenever he speaks of her, even in Baldur's Gate 3, it's always in the most glowing terms. He truly is just that wrapped around her finger, even long after she dies. Speaking of...
Then, everything changed when the Fire Nation attacked.
In 1358 DR, Bane and Merkel pulled off a daring heist to steal a pair of magical stone slabs known as the Tablets of Fate from their divine boss, Ao, which kick-started what is known as the Time of Troubles or the Avatar Crisis. Ao is an overgod, a sort of god of gods, who rules over the giant crystal sphere that contains the solar system, that contains the planet of Toriel on which the Forgotten Realms exists. And he was originally unknown to mortals before this crisis brought him to their attention. The theft of his magical tablets, which Bane and Merkel believed would let them siphon and usurp his power, got him so hot under the collar that he yeeted all of the gods down onto the surface of Faerun itself and locked them out of the house. All the gods within Ao's reach, with the exception of loyal sad boy Helm, who Ao left to guard the porch, found themselves in extremely vulnerable forms, stripped of most of their powers, and forced to possess mortals in order to meaningfully interact with the world. These possessed mortals would be their avatars, hence Avatar Crisis. Meanwhile, in the mortal realms, King Azun of Cormyr had directed his spy ring to uncover the true names of the most senior Red Wizards of Thay, so that the information could be used as a leverage against the rival Magocracy. As those spies were traveling across the desert to bring their finished list to King Azun,
many Bothans died to bring us this information.
They were ambushed and eaten by a dragon. An adventurer named Norrell Talbot caught wind of both the attack and an inkling of their secret cargo. So while a much more competent adventuring party tracked down and slew the dragon itself, he and his company of the Lynx shadowed them, waiting for their moment. They then chased after the dragon's corpse that had crashed into the banks of the Lake Wyvern water after it was mortally wounded. Fearing that there'd be some nasty magical protections on the diplomatic pouches, Talbot hired a mid-level wizard called Midnight as a sort of magical locksmith. She was successful in opening up the bag safely, and Talbot acted all disappointed and told her they just contained boring trade paperwork. In fact, he was planning to hold a grand auction to sell off the information to the highest bidder. But little did he know, Midnight had been casting clairvoyance and listening to them the whole time while they were talking about their scheme, and also about how they'd planned to dispose of her now that she'd outlived her usefulness. So she grabbed the documents and ran, but they cornered her. She prayed to Mystra in desperation, and wouldn't you know it, Mystra was watching, having noted the signs of some impending calamity and spotted an opportunity for a contingency plan. She told Midnight that she could indeed save her, so long as Midnight did her a favor in return. "Yes, Mystra," Midnight screamed. "Anything you ask." So Mystra disintegrated the company of the Lynx and grafted a nice little pendant with a star symbol directly into Midnight's skin. A little fragment of her true divine power, which she could recover later should the worst come to pass. Soon after, Mystra arrived in Faerun, a harrowed, beaten, and nearly powerless shade. Mystra then set about trying to recover the divine nest egg she'd stored in Midnight, but the spell she cast to locate it didn't work, and when she tried again, the spell triggered a surge of wild magic that knocked her unconscious. Magic had itself been sorta damaged by Mystra's exile, and it was starting to go haywire across the world. Meanwhile, the newly mortal Bane was troubled by something. When Ao had sentenced the gods to their fate, he could have sworn that Mystra was smiling at him. She knew something that he didn't. She had some sort of plan, so he sent out agents to find her, and find her they did, on a metaphorical heap on the floor, where her misfired spell had left her. It's all coming up, Bane. Bane ties her up in the basement and makes her an offer. Swear allegiance to him, and together they'll take Ao down. She laughs in his face, so instead he starts torturing her by having a conjured planar monster, a Hackashar, feed on her magic and siphon some of it away to him. But Mystra has an ace up her sleeve. When Bane captured Mystra, the goddess used a fraction of her power to send out a modified Gaia spell in the form of a magical falcon. The potential avatar it would locate would be young with immense potential, an untrained yet great magic user. When it located Caitlin, there was an instant of contact between Mystra and the girl, and in that instant, the goddess instructed her to find Midnight and the pendant and gather warriors worthy of her cause. So, what does a Gaia spell actually do? Well, the events of the Avatar Crisis are sort of the point at which AD&D 1st Edition becomes 2nd Edition, with the edition differences being metafictionally explained by the tumult of this whole divine crisis. They do a similar thing for a transition between 2nd and 3rd Edition, which canonically was caused by the Lady of Pain rewriting the whole of reality at the conclusion of the module Die Vecna Die, then 4th Edition is caused by the Spell Plague, and 5th by the Second Sundering. Fortunately for us, the text of the Gaia spell is more or less identical between 1st and 2nd editions. A Gaia spell places a magical command upon a creature, usually a human or humanoid, to carry out some service or to refrain from some action or course of activity as desired by the spellcaster. The creature must be intelligent, conscious, under its own volition, and able to understand the caster. While a Gaius cannot compel a creature to kill itself or perform acts that are likely to result in certain death, it can cause almost any other course of action. The Gaius creature must follow the given instructions until the Gaius is completed. Failure to do so will cause the creature to grow sick and die within 1d4 weeks. Deviation from or twisting of the instructions causes a corresponding loss of strength points until the deviation ceases. A Gaius can be done away with by a wish spell, but a dispel magic or remove curse will not negate it. Your DM will decide any additional details of a Gaius, for its casting and fulfillment are tricky, and an improperly cast Gaius is ignored. Of course the spell doesn't respect consent. This is Mystra we're talking about. She's sending out a magical mind control bird to go find her the perfect avatar and order them to come to her, and then she's going to force herself into their body. In the end, her victim does seem to consent, but it's not like she had any choice whatsoever. She'll grow sick and die if she doesn't. So who was this Caitlin Moonsong? Kelemvor turned and regarded the slip of a girl who had challenged him. She was no more than 15, and her delicate features appeared to have paid the price for their hardships and worries she had obviously recently undertaken. Her hair was blonde and cut short in a boyish style, the strands matted to her scalp by her sweat. The clothes worn by the girl were somewhat better than rags, and she could easily have been mistaken for a beggar. The girl seemed weak, although she smiled bravely and attempted to move with a confidence her body no longer seemed ready to indulge. Yeah. It's another teenager. I'd say the moral of the story is that people should do a better job of hiding their kids from Mistra's predatory grasp, but a lot of the kids she snatches are orphans. We don't know if Caitlin was an orphan, but if she wasn't, she'd have just walked out on her family one day and never come back. Because as we see later, the Gaius doesn't give her any wiggle room to do anything except obey her mistress's commands to the letter. Caitlin is an empathetic person, however, neutral good in alignment, and does genuinely seem to want to help rescue Mystra from her imprisonment at the hands of a god of strife and tyranny. Not only that, but the goddess of magic needs her help. She has a special destiny. She's going on an adventure to literally save the world. What heroic teenager wouldn't jump at the chance? Perhaps you're starting to see a pattern in the way Mistra's interactions with mortals tend to go. She finds someone weaker, younger, and more vulnerable, often at a vulnerable time in their lives or in imminent mortal peril, dazzles them with her divine attention so they're too starstruck to think twice, convinces them to give themselves to her body and mind, uses them, and if they're especially lucky, she won't discard them when they're all used up. After having set out on her adventure, Caitlin is having a bit of a rough time. She's walking barefoot, but she's just got to keep on walking. She's literally bleeding from an injury, but she can't seem to stop to rest because, well, time is of the essence. Hurry it up! Caitlin will promise to meet the PCs at a certain place and time to lead them out of Arabelle to her mistress. She will then stagger away to the ladies' jakes, washrooms, and not reappear. If the PCs inquire, some female patron will say, "She was hurt, poor thing, blood all down her side. She left with a cleric of Lathander. I think, or was it a lady of Ilmater? I can never keep those saintly sorts of priest women straight, I'm afraid." The module explains that her condition is the Gaius spell's doing. It's hurting her because Mystra is desperate, and that desperation means Caitlin just isn't going fast enough. Even though she's running around doing Mistra's bidding until she literally collapses from exhaustion, then getting up and continuing to march towards her next waypoint while her wounds bleed out. Nah, that's still not fast enough. Caitlin is ghastly white of skin. Her eyes are sunken, her purple veins stand out on her chin and arms and around her eyes. Sweat stands on her brow. She trembles slightly and looks thinner than ever. My friends, she says, teeth chattering. I have had fever, and I'm not well enough to go with you. Please, please rescue my mistress. I will follow as soon as I can. This I swear. Look for her in a tower in Castle Kilgrave. She must be weak by now. Please go to her in all haste and free her. Beware the Black Hand. Caitlin looks at you all, wild-eyed, and her face twists in a sob. Then she repeats, I will follow. Voice trembling with resolve as she turns and stumbles away, arms about herself, shivering. She reaches a priest of Ilmater who accompanied her to you, and collapses in a heap at his feet. I can't believe Mystra cast Amazon Warehouse on a child. In the novel, Caitlin's physical degeneration isn't quite as extreme, but she's still rigidly kept on task. She assembles an adventuring party that includes Midnight, the secret contingency plan wizard from earlier, a warrior called Kelemvor Lionsbane, and a thief named Cyric. Gee, none of those names sound at all familiar. Also, there's a priest called Adon. Kelemvor finds Caitlin's behavior confusing and weirdly unchildlike because he isn't aware of the Gaius, only that she had requested their help rescuing her unspecified mistress from the clutches of villains, and then sort of alternates between solemn silence and tremors of fear. Just before he attempted to sleep, Kelemvor watched as Caitlin sat alone, staring off at the horizon. The girl had said very little after the attack in the forest, and the fighter wondered what was going on behind her enigmatic stare. At times, Caitlin appeared to be nothing more than a frightened child. At other times, her intelligence and resolve reminded him of a battle-weary general. The contradiction was baffling. Midnight was surprised by Caitlin's silence as they waited for the men to finish. She enjoyed talking to the girl, yet even as she gently prodded at Caitlin for a few words, the girl remained completely silent, gazing at the horizon. Midnight saw that Caitlin was trembling, and the magic user wrapped her cloak around the girl. "My pledge is to Caitlin as much as to you, Gale," Midnight said, hugging the frightened girl. "I will continue. There should not have been any doubt." By gathering the party together, Caitlin probably wins herself a brief reprieve, since she can now only move as fast as they do. When they rest, she can rest too. But this doesn't last. Mystra eventually becomes so desperate for rescue, she reaches out directly to change the instructions and teach her how to activate a dormant contingency spell she set up earlier. So Caitlin has to just up and abandon the party she spent all this time gathering. "Come at once," Mystra commanded, and Caitlin responded. Despite the words of the goddess ordering her to leave her newfound friends behind, Caitlin was tempted to rouse Midnight or Kellenbor and tell them of Mistra's summons. Tell them that no more time could be wasted. They had to go to the castle right away. But Mistra's commands had to be followed to the letter, so Caitlin silently repeated the words to the spell and was lifted into the night sky. Cyric didn't even hear her stir, and despite her exhilaration at the experience of sailing through the air, Caitlin never forgot the somber reason for her flight. The goddess needed her. Obviously, Kellenbor and company being heroes, they rush after her, but Caitlin reaches Mystra first, and she does seem kinda hype about the idea of what awaits her. As I said before, Caitlin is a good person, and this is a rescue mission. She's doing a good thing. And I guess this whole adventure has been kinda miserable so far. But here she is at the end, meeting her deity and finally receiving her special destiny. No more walking on shredded, bleeding feet until she collapses in exhaustion. It was then that Caitlin knew what was expected of her, and she rejoiced in the knowledge of her ultimate fate. But before her, Bane shouted at the goddess, hurling vile threats against her, imploring the captive goddess to join him in some mad plan he had devised. Mystra did not respond, and Caitlin feared that the goddess's essence was dwindling, that the goddess might die. Then she shook herself from such thoughts and waited for Bane to turn away long enough for her to cross the distance that separated her from the goddess of magic. Then it would be Mistra's turn to rejoice. This is basically the last thought we ever hear from Caitlin, because when we next see her, Mystra has taken over her body, and we never hear her speak again except as Mystra. Her whole personality is seemingly gone and replaced with that of the goddess. Mystra occasionally pays lip service to us, but it's not even clear if there's much of Caitlin Moonsong left. From here on out, she is haughty and cruel. A small stone struck the puddle of water before Bane's face, causing the fallen god to look up. A young girl he'd never seen before stood in the doorway. She was smiling from ear to ear. A handful of stones that she had dislodged from the crumbling wall beside her rested comfortably in her hand. "It's not pleasant having your power turned against you, is it?" he said simply, and the voice was horribly familiar. "And now it's Bane's turn to have a no-good, very bad day." The Black Lord's chest burst open, and a flood of bluish-white fires exploded from him and engulfed Mystra, who held her hands out to the flow of magic and welcomed it into her. The fires changed, becoming a blazing amber and then a bright glowing red, as Bane felt the last of the energies he had taken from Mystra leave him and the first of his own depart as well. "You imprisoned the goddess of magic, you fool! Now you'll pay in kind for what you did to me." Bane cried out as more of his energy left him. "Mystra, I'm dying?" she said. "Aye, it would appear so. Do give my regards to Lord Merkel. I don't believe he's ever had a god as one of his charges before. But you're not a god anymore. Are you, Bane?" When Kellenbor and company catch up, they find who they think is Caitlin magically ripping apart some guy they don't recognize, before one of Bane's minions manages to grab him and teleport the two of them away. Mystra, in Caitlin's body, then turns to the party of heroes and demands what's hers. A sudden anger passed through the goddess. "I am Mystra, goddess of magic. The creature I fought was Bane, god of strife. Now give me that pendant. It's mine." Midnight and Adon stared at the avatar in shock. Kellenbor frowned. Cyric eyed Mystra suspiciously. Kellenbor folded his arms. "Perhaps the battle has addled her young brains." "Caitlin Moonsong and I have become one," Mystra said calmly. "I brought her to this place and merged our souls to save us both from Lord Bane. You aided her on her journey, and so you have earned our thanks." "And a damn shade more," Kellenbor said. "The debt will be repaid," Mystra said, and Kellenbor remembered the words of Caitlin on her sickbed. "She can cure you." For you see, Celeborn has long suffered a hereditary curse. It all started 5 generations ago with one Kyle Lionsbane. He was a greedy professional mercenary who abandoned one of his allies to die on the battlefield after she was injured bravely defending him. All so he could run off to plunder their enemy's stronghold before anyone else could. But she was a sorceress, and with her dying breath she cursed him and his descendants that they would never again be able to act for their own personal profit. Should any man of the Lionsbane family do so, they would transform into a ravenous beast and destroy all they loved. Within a few generations, the curse began to mutate unpredictably. By the time it passed down to Celeborn, it had inverted. Now the cursed Lionsbanes must always ask for a reward, or else they would transform into a ravenous beast and destroy all that they loved. It became the custom in the Lionsbane family for sons to slay their fathers at the age of 50, the reasoning being that their memories would likely begin to fail from that point on, and it would become more likely one day they'd forget to ask for a reward and suddenly become a problem. When Celeborn fell in love at the age of 13, his father thought his girlfriend was making him soft and almost beat her to death. When Celeborn stepped in to defend her, because this was a selfless act done without expectation of monetary reward, he transformed and ripped his father apart. Honestly, good job. Fortunately, Celeborn managed to maintain enough control to avoid killing his girlfriend too, who helped him escape, but he spent the next few months living in the woods as a feral beast as his control over his own mind slipped away. Celeborn would later kill his own brother in another transformation incident, though he absolutely deserved it too, but this curse had basically ruined Celeborn's life, and Caitlin had promised a cure by way of the mysterious mistress she served. And though Celeborn was skeptical that lifting the curse was even possible at this point, he'd maintained the tiniest flicker of hope. But now that Caitlin was claiming to be a god, Celeborn had started to doubt again. Celeborn stood beside Midnight, and soon their argument resumed. Cyric watched without interfering, and Adon stood silently, watching the goddess before him. Certainly she is powerful, and her tale of bonding with her mistress may well be true, Celeborn said. Then why do you deny your senses? Don't you appreciate Mystra's gifts of gratitude? They were well earned, Celeborn said as he stuffed a large chunk of sweetbread in his mouth. But a powerful mage such as Elminster of Shadowdale could easily perform the same feats. I've seen another of these gods, and I'm not sure they aren't powerful lunatics. Mystra looked up at the mention of Elminster, and a smile played across her face, as if some private reverie amused her for a moment. Then she returned to her preparations. The other god, incidentally, was Timora, who in her new mortal form had taken to sitting in one of her temples and asking for money in exchange for letting mortals gaze upon her. Both Celeborn and Cyric had both paid up to see what the fuss was about, and neither were impressed. On a dare from Celeborn, his fellow unfortunate in the Knightsbridge fiasco, Cyric had visited the ruined temple of Timora and paid the price to bask in the presence of Arabelle's newly seated resident deity. Although Cyric had promised himself to view this event with an open, optimistic eye, the goddess saw right through him. You do not believe in me, Timora said, her tone devoid of feeling. I believe in the evidence of my senses, Cyric said bluntly. If you're a goddess, what need do you have of my gold? The goddess regarded him in an aloof manner, and then looked away and raised one of her finely manicured hands to indicate the audience was ended. Cyric picked the pockets of 3 of Timora's clerics on the way out and gave the money to a mission for the poor that afternoon. Cyric may be more awesome than I'd originally given him credit for. So Mystra explains her plan to the party. With her pendant retrieved from Midnight, she has regained a sliver of the divine power she once wielded, stashed away for just such an eventuality. And with that divine power, she can finally open her celestial garage door. Before you, invisible to the human senses, is a celestial stairway. The stairway is a means of traveling between the kingdom of the gods and the humans. I am about to undertake a dangerous task. If I succeed, the 4 of you will be my witnesses as I return to the plains. If I fail, at least one of you must carry my words to the world. This is a sacred task that I may only charge to one whose faith is unquestioning. Midnight is enthusiastic. She believes wholeheartedly that this is indeed Mystra, and is overjoyed to serve her beloved goddess. The whole business with the pendant was proof enough for her. Cyric is just intrigued, and Celeborn remains skeptical. He thinks they're in over their heads and should quit while the getting is good. Celeborn folded his arms over his chest and laughed as he leaned against his horse. This is absurd. She's making all this up as she goes along. Suddenly, Mystra's words bore into the privacy of the fighter's mind. I could have cured you, she said. Since you do not believe me, I will not. Enjoy being cursed forever, nerd. I wonder which of your loved ones you'll eat next time you turn into a beast. I wonder which boy you'll burden with the duty of slaying you when you reach your 50th year. I wonder if they'll have nightmares about it like you do. Haha, sucks to be traumatized. So with Kellenbor's hopes and dreams suitably crushed, she prepares to carry out her plan. But first, she decides to reshape Caitlyn's body more to her liking. Caitlyn's form was becoming less distinct, and as it shimmered, the heroes saw the child transformed into the woman she had been destined to become. Her body was lush and beautiful, her face delicate and sensual, but her eyes were very old, revealing a millennium of private concerns. Ugh, seriously? But anyway, she ascends the staircase and comes face to face with the sad boy Ao left there to guard the porch. And it goes poorly. Helm has no intention of letting Mystra through. Even when she states she has the identity of the culprits of the theft of the Tablets of Fate, that isn't enough. Helm's instructions are clear. No tablets, no entry. And Mystra makes it clear she won't take no for an answer. I have no desire to harm you, good Helm. Stand away. It is my duty to stop you, Helm said. I was lax in my duties once. Never again. Helm descended further. Stand away, Mystra said, her voice as loud as a thunderclap. Helm stood his ground. Do not force me to harm you, Mystra. I am still a god. You are not. Mystra froze. Not a god, you say? I will prove you wrong. Mystra strikes first, conjuring a barrage of fire to sear away his flesh, but Helm is literally a freaking god, and he just shrugs it all off. When he starts swinging back at her, she decides to try and break his mind with traumatizing visions of his greatest fears. Mystra felt her blood turn cold as Helm's hand grazed her shoulder. In retaliation, the goddess of magic released a spell meant to attack Helm's psyche, exploiting his fears and forcing him to bow before her as he quaked in terror. The Guardian gritted his teeth and struck again, ignoring Mystra's attack. The Guardian's greatest fear had been to fail Ao. As he had already confronted this fear, there was nothing left to frighten him. Helm knows that
fear is the mind killer.
So again, he shrugs it off, so Mystra decides to just sprint for it. She is not quick enough. It was difficult to concentrate beyond the incredible agonies her body had endured, but she clawed her way up the stairway, her mind reeling as the gateway rose up before her and the true majesty of the plains presented itself. For an instant, the goddess caught a glimpse of the beauty and perfection of her home in Nirvana. All this was mine, Mystra thought. She reached the summit, her legs trembling beneath her. Then the goddess of magic grabbed for the gate, and a hand grasped her arm, spinning her around. There was a look of sadness in Helm's eyes. Farewell, goddess, Helm said. Then he drove his hand straight through her chest. Who was Mystra kidding, really? Sliver of divine power or not, she tried to fight a god in the body of a mortal. The expression, don't bring a knife to a gunfight, is a hell of an understatement here. But the module sort of implies that Mystra maybe wants to die. When she takes on Helm, it's probably not a stretch to say that she'd rather it all end than have to spend another miserable moment in this stupid, stinky, mortal world. If she can't go back to the paradise of Nirvana, it's not worth it. Mystra has grown tired and bitter. Only her pride and the kindnesses of those who do not worship or aid her for magical gain keep her going. Perhaps it is time for a new mistress of magic to rise, allowing Mystra to slumber, her essence scattered throughout many beings and items of the realms, in quiet support of a new goddess of the art. And you can sort of see that in when Mystra got the party together to explain her plan. She's already talking about how dangerous it'll be and who's got to do what if it doesn't work out. She's hoping she'll make it, but deep down she probably knows she won't. So it really, really sucks to be Caitlyn, who just gets haplessly dragged down with her. Mystra basically just steals the body of a child and then uses it to body slam a cop. After a brutal, relentless march of an adventurer spent mostly suffering in silence, she dies horribly. Mystra's head was thrown back in unknowable agony as her essence fled from her avatar and her fragile human flesh exploded. Midnight felt an intense heat rush towards her, as if a searing, invisible wall of energy was approaching. The bluish-white fires that had set the grass ablaze with their gentle magics now became black flames that scoured the earth and left the soil barren in their wake. The devastation began in the area directly below the goddess and branched out in every direction. Caitlyn probably doesn't even get an afterlife, since having your essence annihilated by a god is sort of extremely final. Being neutral good, she would have gone to D&D heaven almost certainly, but also Mystra has jurisdiction over her soul anyway, so had she just refused to surrender her body, she may have suffered the judgment of the false, just to really drive home how little choice she had in all that. And had Mystra been successful in getting past Helm, well, we've seen how unhealthy that was for the last mortal that Mystra possessed. And so that's where the first Mystra story ends. She died the way she lived, screwing over a child.
All I know is my gut says maybe.
You might think it can only get better from here, right? The next Mystra, the Mystra of the present day of the Forgotten Realms setting, isn't chaotic evil, hiding under a Scooby-Doo villain mask that says lawful neutral. The next Mystra is... neutral good? Some say that her duty should preclude her from leaning too much towards either good or evil. After all, the original Mystra concentrated only on the laws of magic and left the moralizing to those better qualified for it. Well, the new Mystra doesn't see it that way. She thinks magic should be used for the greater good, to enhance the quality of life throughout the lands that make use of the weave, and she's slowly changing the rules of magic to make her will known. And that's very much how it started. The second Mystra, who was once a mortal named Midnight, did ascend to her position with the dream in her heart that she was going to use her stewardship of magic and deific power for good, to do the right thing, to make the world a better, kinder place. But this caused her to run afoul of Ao, who schemed to break her, and the other gods, who put her on trial for the crime of humanity. But this is another story. And then, when we check back in with her in Baldur's Gate 3, she's a much colder, crueler, and less idealistic person. She started following in the footsteps of her predecessor. Not in the sense that she's committing the same kind of visceral atrocities. She's not cosplaying as an evil Bane witch to turn kingdoms to ash. She's not running a magical eugenics breeding program with unconsenting strangers. But she is abusing her power and station to manipulate a mortal into a romantic entanglement that distorts his development as a person and more or less ruins his life. She molds and manipulates a young boy into becoming her lover, then discards him the moment he shows himself to be an imperfect one. She demands that he not only sacrifice his life, but his soul to make amends. Tells him that only posthumously will she forgive him. And she's doing this, in a certain sense, for the greater good. To destroy a threat to not just Faerun, but to all creation. But in doing so, she's not Midnight anymore. She's Mystra. Because, what if it's not the king that's the problem? What if it's the crown? Hey there, thanks for watching. If you liked the video, please hit subscribe. You'll see right now a list of my patrons and our new YouTube members. I'd love to shout out all the Twitch subs as well, but it's a little bit too big of a list, and it changes a lot, so hopefully we'll be able to do something about that in the future. Thanks very much.